All right, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. This is CS50 on Twitch. My name is Colton Ogden, and today we're going to take a little bit of a diversion away from game programming. Now, I apologize to anybody in the stream right now. We took a minor break. This is actually a restart of the original stream. But we weren't cross-streaming to Facebook and YouTube, but we should now be streaming to both Facebook and YouTube, in addition to Twitch today. So if you're watching on any of those platforms, thank you for tuning in. Welcome to our Twitch show. Normally, I do game programming streams. We code things from scratch on stream, typically, making a small, simple project. Like the other day, we did a typing game and Hangman. Next week, we'll probably do Minesweeper, which would be super fun. Kudos to, I think it was Bavik Knight who recommended that game. But today, we're actually going to take a little bit of a break away from games and cover a area of programming that I'm very interested in, but don't necessarily have much skill in, and that is web programming. And web programming is all the rage, and there are a ton of technologies, languages, tools used in the world of web programming, but ultimately it all boils down to a lot of core, simple, foundational technologies that folks then build upon, and there's a trifecta that you could think of as being the core set of technologies, those being HTML, the skeleton of sort of web pages. I've heard it being referred to as sort of the nouns. Then you have CSS, which is the styling, which some folks refer to as the adjectives. And then lastly, JavaScript, which I don't know if it has an anatomical sort of analog, but certainly the verbs of web programming. I'm going to shout out some people in the chat who kindly waited while we were getting everything set up here. So we did shout out Asley, Bavik Knight, Bellacures, M. Kloppenberg, Brenda, David J. Malin, Ultraviolet Pilot, and a lot of folks were having sort of a side conversation about some other tools in future streams, CSS being among them. And tune in next week because David will be doing a stream on Render 50, which is somewhat related, well, not super related to this. We typically render a lot of HTML and CSS using Render 50, but it itself is not a HTML. Actually, I don't remember offhand if David wants to chime in if it actually uses a virtual DOM, a virtual web browser underneath the hood. Don't remember offhand. Granola Bar 20 just joined the stream. What are we doing today? We're going to be covering HTML, which is David kindly pointed out there in the chat as well. So what is HTML? Now, when we started the stream earlier, I was looking for a nice sort of representative example of an HTML page. And certainly we'll write a few today on stream live. But this is, I think, a pretty good demonstration of a lot of the different features of HTML without any CSS styling. It shows that we have, and effectively this is what HTML looks like underneath everything. It ultimately does look like black and white text and images. What all it really is just a way for folks to send bits of information that communicate some sort of meaning across the internet. And you could maybe think instinctively, I want to send somebody a web page that, for example, has some bold text up here that says example of a simple HTML page. But if I were to just, for example, write literally the words example of a simple HTML page, that in and of itself doesn't carry the information that refers to the fact that it's larger than the other text on the screen, larger and bolder, for example, than the text underneath it that says hypertext markup language, HTML is the most common language used to create documents on the World Wide Web, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And for example, it doesn't also illustrate how we, and some of this is, I'm not sure if this is trying to literally show us what B tags look like, but you can also communicate things like whether certain elements should be not indented, but whether certain elements should be italicized or bold, or maybe things should be in a list or a table. Maybe there should be text fields and that sort of information. Things that are not super easy to represent with just pure text. We can see how HTML lets us solve this problem. And yeah, David's saying we use a Python library to create the PDFs. WheezyPrint, which I had known we used Python, but wasn't sure if it actually was a proxy to like something like Phantom.js, so like sort of an invisible browser which renders stuff for you. But that's cool. So let's go ahead and talk about, I guess, the basics of HTML. I have a whole outline. We have a whole lot of really cool stuff to talk about. The very first thing we should do, like we always normally do, is create our very first file and write some code. So I have a folder in the streams subfolder, which we've used on every stream so far, or at least most streams so far that involve programming. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this HTML, because this is our HTML stream. And then I'm going to create a, I'm going to pull this over to my text editor, which is VS Code. And just like any other programming language, you can use VS Code or some other text editor to write this, this HTML, which you can then run in your web browser. And we'll talk about web browsers as well. Paintbrush-looking head, says Kunavrito. Yeah, that's right. I've said this probably, I'm like a broken record, probably said this 6 or 7 times. I need to get a haircut really badly. I'm going to get, I'll say this on stream, and I'll commit this. On Sunday, I'm going to get a haircut. So it's been marked. If I don't have a haircut by next week's stream, you all can make fun of me for it. I've created a file called index.html. And this is just a file on my hard drive with an extension html.html. And this basically, we can run this in any web browser now. In a web browser, what we can look at here to define what a web browser is. A web browser is just an application that expects to receive information via HTTP or some other protocols. And it renders, if it sees that the file is HTML and has CSS and JavaScript, it'll actually render that for us. Not terribly unlike a game engine, I guess, in a sort of an abstract way to think about it. But it expects a certain format of information, and it will render things per a set of standards. And I believe it's the W3C that has created these standards, the World Wide Web Consortium, who's defined what HTML should be, specifically HTML5, at least as far as the HTML we'll be using today and in future streams. What CSS should be. I don't believe they define JavaScript. That's ECMAScript, which is a different committee, unless W3C defines the ECMAScript standard. A lot of those details I don't know offhand necessarily, but they are responsible for at least, as far as I'm aware, the HTML standard. Now, I could be horribly wrong. I hope I'm not wrong about that. I thought I had read that earlier. But some organization has said HTML needs to contain these elements. So let's take a look at what HTML, first of all, looks like. So I'm going to go ahead, and you'll see a lot of what HTML is comprised of are these sort of angle brackets, these less than and greater than signs. For example, this tag that says HTML. And I'm going to bring my font size up just a little bit so we can see what we're looking at. So in my text editor, I've just written what's called a tag, or 2 tags, an opening tag and a closing tag. And this basically just means that whatever is inside this tag, whatever is between the start and the end, is something. In this case, it's HTML. But more abstractly, you could say whatever is within these tags, maybe it's what I'm going to define to be a dog. And actually, in a future stream, we'll take a look at how we might actually make something called dog, a tag called dog, which has some sort of semantic meaning. Today, we're not going to go into custom tags in detail. We'll reference them, because you actually need to use what's called JavaScript to make that work, to make non-standard tags work. But all this means is that anything that's within these 2 tags is whatever the word is inside the tag. In this case, it's HTML. And every HTML file has 2 core parts, really, a head and a body. And this kind of almost ties back to our anatomical analogy earlier in a different way. But a head contains usually some information that's not rendered in our web browser. For example, if we go back to Chrome, none of the stuff that you see here in the main window is usually in the head. But the stuff that you see up here, for example, in this title, where you can very small font see HTML examples, that's a tag, that's a bit of information that we put in our head. And everything that you see here underneath, the actual meat and potatoes of our web application, our website, is in the HTML body. Let me make sure I've caught up on the... Kunavita says, don't get a haircut. I am bald, so I guess you won. No, your hair is awesome. Don't get it cut. I honestly, it's getting a little long from my personal taste. Ela Porcodio, Coralse says, I'm not sure what that means, actually. TC39 JavaScript, I think. TC39. What is TC39? Is that a... Oh, ECMA TC39. Is that the committee? ECMA International Technical Committee 39? That makes sense. So that's the committee responsible for defining the ECMAScript standard. I'd have to look into a little bit more detail. But based on just that, that looks accurate to me. So this is the core, sort of the base of what an HTML document is. Now, there's a few other things. doc type HTML. And this sort of at the very top of our application says to our web browser that this particular document is an HTML document. I'm going to have to think about I don't know offhand the use cases where it's strictly necessary, because I do believe Chrome will just render it even without this doc type HTML. But as good practice and for things that aren't necessarily as robust as Chrome, for example, screen readers and certain like streaming service devices that use web browsers underneath the hood, their own proprietary web browser, you might want to include this doc type, or else the renderer will get confused as to whether maybe this is HTML versus XML and have issues rendering it. But typically, you'll see this tag at the very top, this angle bracket, exclamation point, doc type in caps, which I actually don't think that even is strictly necessary. But typically, you'll see it in caps, and then HTML, saying this is an HTML document. And so this is the foundation. This is what an HTML document ultimately boils down to. And of course, the devil is in the details. And there's a lot of details. There's a lot of tags and a lot of other things that we can do to add to our document, to add to our HTML document. The things that actually make up what we see, what we physically see. For example, this header right here. Well, what is a header? That's a good place to start. Let's get some actual text rendering onto the screen, I guess. And then we'll come back to head maybe in just a minute as well to see the title tag, which is also very important. So in my body, if I type, for example, H1, which is short for header priority 1, I guess you could think of it as. And then I say CS50, right? Now I have an HTML document. I actually have to render it somewhere. I need a web browser that can do this. So I'm going to go to Finder, and I'm going to just double click on index.html. And Chrome is my default. And actually, I'm going to change my resolution. I just realized that for some reason, I went from 1080p to 720p. I'm not sure why that is. Forgive me for just a second here. Scaled, 720p. And let me readjust the size of the window, which is a little bit messed up. And now we should be able to see things just a little bit better. If anything was a little bit tiny in the font size, we can just see that just a little bit better. I'm going to quit my system preferences. I'm going to shrink this down. This is a little large. But now I have an HTML page that just has a header. And I'm going to go to my Finder. Now you can see it a lot better. I'm going to double click index.html. And we see, just as we sort of predicted, that we have this large text that says CS50. And this large text is what's called a header. And headers can be used for a lot of things, and there's different degrees of them. Let's go ahead and write out some of the other headers just so we can see what they look like. For example, H2, rather. Messed up. The nice thing about VS Code is if you type a tag, a couple things will happen. So you can type the tag manually like this. You can close it yourself. And you'll see that, and this is something that a lot of text editors do. This isn't just necessarily VS Code. I think Atom and Sublime also do this, in addition to many other features. But notice that I typed H2, I closed it, and it gave me the corresponding closing H2 tag. And that's just a nice feature of modern text editors to help folks not forget to close tags, which can be often a subtle, especially in web development, because it's not going to give you an error message if you don't have a closing tag necessarily. Rather, your web content is going to render in a very strange way because HTML will parse top to bottom your HTML file and apply styling and all sorts of things. We can maybe explore that in detail in the future. But suffice to say, this helps out in terms of preventing us from forgetting closing tags. So I'm going to write an H2. I'm going to write my name. I'm going to save it. I'm going to go back to Chrome. And Chrome, by the way, is an excellent debugging web browser for web development. And we'll take a look at what are called the developer tools in a little bit. But just for now, I'm going to just illustrate a few simple things first. If I refresh the page just by hitting Command R or Control R on a PC, you'll see that it refreshes the content that I saved to my disk because it reloads the file. And notice up here at the very top in the header, you can see in the URL bar, you can see that I'm using what's called the file protocol, which just means that instead of Chrome making HTTP requests to some server, meaning asking some server on the internet for some information, it's instead asking my local hard drive for the information. And so you can see it does map to a URL on my hard drive at /users, jharvard, dev, streams, web. HTML, index.html, just as we saved ourselves earlier. But I could also just in this URL bar type google.com, and now notice that the protocol changes from file to HTTPS. So different protocols that can serve content in different ways. Now the file, it refreshed the file from my hard drive, and now we see that we do indeed have an H1 and an H2. I can do the same exact thing with an H3. For example, type David's name here. Go back to Chrome, refresh that. I can go over here, type in H4, type Dan Coffee, who kindly helped get us back onto streaming after our first mild hiccup. Dan Coffee. And notice that as we're going from H1 to H2 to H3 to H4, all the way down eventually to H5, and I'll say Happy Cat, and H6 we'll say Grumpy Cat, some other CS50 actors, so to speak, we get progressively smaller text. And these are just some default stylings that are applied to these particular headers. You can override these stylings as you wish with a technology called CSS, which we will take a look at in a future stream. Next week, actually, I believe we have the stream. We're going to have the stream on CSS. But by default, if you're just looking at plain HTML sort of as it existed back in the 80s, 90s, I forget offhand the exact date that CSS was formalized, or at least I think HTML3 introduced CSS, or introduced styling rather, and then after that, because of how bulky it was, they introduced CSS to separate styling from HTML. But prior to a lot of that, HTML looked something very similar to this. And originally, it was used to transmit research papers and sort of those kinds of things that didn't necessarily need a lot of styling, a lot of fanciness. And so a lot of the features that it does have are sort of, you can imagine them being just the subset of features that you would need to communicate research papers and sort of limited information without the need for styling. And we'll take a look at some more of that. The Killer Potato says a bit off topic, but how in-depth will this be? And will there be streams about CSS and JavaScript? Not off topic at all. This will cover probably the majority of the core tags that you use in daily web development. We're not going to necessarily go into too much detail on some of the more complicated stuff, but on another stream next week, we will cover CSS, in which case we can bridge these two streams. And then in another stream after that, we'll cover JavaScript, in which case we can add more layers onto that. And then we'll cover things like Bootstrap. We'll cover things like jQuery. We'll cover things like DOM manipulation. We'll go into a lot more detail. But today, this is meant to be just a very simple introduction to the core of web pages, and that's HTML. So we've looked at some headers here, probably one of the more basic elements. You'll notice one thing about all the H elements is that they do sort of go onto the next line. But if I were to, we'll see an example of when that might not be the case in a little bit. But take note of the fact that all of these H tags are sort of going down below each other. They're going to a new line explicitly. We haven't told it necessarily press enter. I mean, even though we have said press enter here in our text editor, we could very easily say, do all of this, where we have the H2 immediately following the H3 immediately following the H2 immediately following the H1 on the same line. But if we refresh, we'll notice that our HTML page actually hasn't changed at all. So the markup and the way we press enter is independent from the way that things look on the web page. And this we'll take a little bit more of a look at, but this is what's called block level versus inline elements. But it's much more easy to read all of the things sort of separated by new lines. And so independent of maybe necessarily how they're styled, how the new lines are calculated, we want to render things out in this sort of sequential way just so it's easier to read. Because it gets very tedious to read code that looks like this, especially if it's beyond the width of your text editor. So if anybody has any questions in the future, definitely let me know. I love H3. H3 says unfamiliar. Oh, right. Yeah, H3, the tags. A bit off topic, sorry to follow up. Will there be a master stream that combines all of those technologies? Last question for now, haha. Ask as many questions as you want. Certainly, I would love to do a stream like that, to have a lot of streams that do HTML plus CSS and then JavaScript, to have them all together. What I want to do is to eventually have us actually building websites, not using one particular technology in a vacuum, but to actually say, I want to make a blog, I want to make a social media mock-up, and then show how we use the three technologies in tandem rather than necessarily highlighting how they work. But for the purpose of demonstration today, we do want to show just sort of the basic tags and whatnot, the basic mechanics and workings of each individual technology. Do you have any good tools for Visual Studio for web development? Not me, because Visual Studio Code has some very good built-in sort of integrated tools, integrated shortcuts rather. I'm going to illustrate one right now that I really like. I'm going to actually delete the entire corpus of code that we have written so far, this very minimal list of headers. I'm just going to type HTML. And notice that in VS Code, you get a bunch of these sort of pop-ups, these autofills that come up. If I go down here, and notice that they all have different sort of descriptions to them. If I go down to here, I can see as soon as I press down on my keyboard and highlight the thing that has a kind of a box with some dashes underneath it, it says simple HTML5 starting point. And if I hit tab, you'll notice that I didn't have to go through the tedium of typing all of the stuff that we just looked at. Instead, my text editor pre-populated a bunch of those tags for us, including a bunch of new stuff in the head. And so this is a perfect opportunity to look at some of those things. So for example, we didn't look at title before, but I can type in here CS50 on Twitch in my title tag. Notice that it's within the head, so this is not going to be rendered in the actual body itself. And if I go back to my web page, notice that it's going to be completely empty, but at the very top, you can see on our tab, and this will change depending on your browser or your technology. Most web browsers will just have this be reflected in the tab these days, but if you're using, for example, maybe a screen reader or some other application that's on a streaming service provider, what's the word I'm looking for? Like an embedded device. There's a better word for it. But certain different web browsers and different programs that aren't necessarily web browsers might render this title somewhere else. But whatever web browser, whatever renderer you're using is going to use this to place a title somewhere on the page. Is it good practice to write HTML from scratch? Because some IDEs do basic structure for us by default if we save a blank HTML file. I'm guessing that was probably before I did what I just did, but that's kind of in the same vein. You have a basic starting point or a template that you can then bootstrap yourself up from. And so that's what we just did with this here. Now there's some other meta tags that we see here, and these meta tags give our web page some information that's going to change sometimes depending on what web browser we're using. But these meta tags can be used for a bunch of different purposes. They can be looked at by, for example, your mobile phone to determine whether it should be rendered in a certain way. You can have meta tags that embed URLs to pictures so that Facebook, when it crawls your web page, knows how to fetch a picture to render on Facebook when you post some URL to some website. For example, if you have a personal blog and when you want people to post your blog on Facebook, you'll notice that when you post web pages, sometimes an image will come up. That image will typically be in a meta tag of some kind. And so that's what meta is typically associated with, just metadata that can be used for myriad purposes depending on the application. And you'll notice it gives us a couple of things for free, this link to a style sheet, a CSS style sheet, and also a script tag, which links to a JavaScript file. We are not going to use either of these because today's stream is not going to be on JavaScript or CSS, but in the near future, this will be very useful for us. And if anybody has any questions so far on what we've talked about, definitely toss them in the chat. We've talked about the head versus the body. We've talked about the titles, meta. We talked about Chrome, but we haven't really talked about, and yes, metadata is data about data, says For Sunlight. That is correct. One thing that's great about Chrome is the fact that it has what are called developer tools. Now, I'm going to move the chat over just a little bit. Over here. 15 Marius, thank you very much for following. And you'll see that if I can go up here, I can go to Tools, More Tools, and then Developer Tools. So the ... at the top right, and then More Tools, and then Developer Tools. Click on that. You'll see that some stuff pops up. And I'm going to just make this a little larger, kind of zoom this over just a little bit. These developer tools are really cool because they allow you to inspect your HTML document in addition to your styling and your JavaScript at runtime. So you can actually debug your application visually and not necessarily have to keep editing your HTML over and over again and sort of guessing and refreshing. This is a invaluable resource. It can't really be overstated how useful this is in web development these days. And most web browsers actually ship with something very similar to this. Firefox and Safari both come with their own version of developer tools. You can see that we have the HTML tag, we have the head, we have the body. All of this stuff is very similar to what we saw written out in a text file, but we see a representation of it here in the web browser. And independent of how you style your actual HTML page, the styling for this will be consistent. So you can use good or bad styling, but Chrome is going to uniformly style how this looks here in the page here, just so that it makes it easier and consistent to debug applications. So let me pop over here, back to my live format, so I can say The Killer Potato, thank you very much for following. And Agent MIRV, thank you very much. And Marloose1 as well, thank you very much for the follow. I missed that as we were getting our stream up and running. So these developer tools are great. Now, our body is empty, and this is reflected here in the DOM. This is what's called the DOM, the Document Object Model. We won't talk too much about it. And more specifically, this is an implementation of the DOM in code. And that's it's illustrating that. I can type in H1 again, and I can say, for example, we have a special guest. I can say Tom Ballatore in an H1 and bring this over here and refresh. And aptly done, timing-wise, we have a guest named Tom Ballatore joining us today. Hey, Tom, how you doing?
Pretty good. I'm here in the capacity of the Pompadour measurer. So we're gonna see exactly. Oh, the lights are there, but let's.
Oh my
we're
goodness.
Doing it. Let's see here. This is about 4, 5, maybe 6 inches. Well done.
Diagonally, though.
Well, I was kind of going with the hair like up to the side, but that is a pump with some circumference.
That is Tom Ballatore, ladies and gentlemen. So Tom, you've done some web development and stuff. You're here to talk about. We're right now kind of still in the basic stuff, but eventually the goal is to kind of talk about accessibility stuff, correct?
Yes, absolutely.
So
I see my name on the screen. Cool.
I did. I just wrote your name.
Famous?
Yeah, a little bit. I wrote in H1, and actually I can probably get you mic'd up, so just so that you don't sound quiet.
Yeah.
So why don't we do that actually? Apologies, stream. This is going to be great. We have 2 folks here in the stream. If anybody has any questions, and if you want to read off some of this stuff on the chat there, definitely go ahead and do so. And actually, why don't you talk about your relationship to CS50?
My relationship with CS50 is complicated. No, I started, about 3 years ago? I took CS50 in the extension school version, and I just really liked it. And one of the reasons I liked it is they had a DJ.
Oh man.
And, yeah, and he had this was that pad with the 8 thing?
That was the launch pad. That was the launch
pad. And there's this young guy up there doing cool music and stuff. I thought oh, this is cool, because before that I had taken an MIT course in Python, which was really cool, but a bit dry. Okay, a bit dry perhaps. And I thought, hey, CS50's got a really cool vibe. So how am I sounding here?
Let's test. So I'm going to turn my mic out. Let's see if Tom is still audible. Go ahead and speak. Oh.
Okay.
Nope, not great. It sounds like. Let me make sure you're not muted. Here, let me see your mic pack. Are you muted? You are muted. Okay.
Okay, so unmuted.
Yep.
How am I doing now?
Let's try now.
Okay, I'm talking.
Okay, cool. It sounds like you're good to go. You probably sound much better now.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm gonna go ahead and close this door here as well. Just that.
Oh, sorry, let's throw open.
No, it's all good.
Yeah, so I got into CS50. I actually already have a PhD in remote sensing, GIS, mapping stuff, but I got into this computer stuff because I wanted to learn Python for the software I use, and found CS50, and it's kind of like a trick in a sense of you get these really hard P-sets, at least for me they're hard, and then you fight through them, you pull a couple all-nighters maybe, and when you nail a problem, it's that endorphin, whatever it is, that gives you that rush of yes, or serotonin, I don't know what it is. It's really a great feeling. Yeah, so I just got hooked on it. Now I'm a teaching fellow. I'm here for the J term, the January course at the law school. I'm helping TF a course over there. So. And I just got back from a Python tutorial over there. So.
And you also live in Japan, is that correct? Did you mention that?
Yeah, I have been in Japan 24 years. My official address for accounting purposes of Harvard University, according to some new rules, is definitely my U.S. address. So I am in America. But yes, I am. I've been in Japan a long time.
What was the original reason for moving to Japan? I guess.
Oh man, that's I'm so old. I'm 48. Okay, so I was back when Japan was China now, and everybody was they're gonna take over, and they had some programs in my university. I have an undergrad in political science and environmental engineering, so for poli-sci I had to take a language. I took 3 semesters of German, and that was hard, man. So I went to Japanese, which was conversely so hard it was easier, and I just went and I did my PhD there, and I stayed. So it's an interesting place, but
man of mystery.
I like to, yeah, not so much. Yes. Okay, cool.
But you've done some web stuff, and so today, when we get to, I guess after we've covered the basics, the goal is to kind of talk about a little bit accessibility.
Yeah, this is an issue that has come up. So yeah, I forgot to mention this. Like, I'm actually a student in Extension now, Harvard Extension School, and I'm almost done with my degree, I hope. I don't know. I've got like 9 classes done. It's in digital media design because I want to make online courses. One thing I should be doing, if anyone from Asian Development Bank is watching right now, I promise I'll have the system up by next Tuesday morning. We have a class which we're launching. It's got like 736 people now in it.
Wow.
And I'm running the back end, front end, and all that stuff. And it makes me really nervous because it's beyond my scope.
No, you're going to do great. You're going to do great.
Well, we'll see. So that's what I'm in that program for.
Cool, that's awesome. And
so I have some HTML, some CSS stuff, and I like to talk about accessibility because as someone who's colorblind and who's also getting eyes that really has a hard time reading what's in front of me.
I didn't realize you were colorblind. Actually, Nick Wong, who's doing some streams with us previously, is also colorblind.
Yeah, I'm one of the sort of minor red-greenish colorblind guys, so it's not like I see black and white, but yeah. Definitely. So, and I've also worked with other students like who just are, legally blind or something and who cannot see the screen. And a lot of stuff is out there to make the HTML readable. I think Colton I was eavesdropping about 20 minutes ago on this. That's why I did the Pompadour thing. But talking about the tags you can add or attributes you can add to tags like alt text and stuff, you can go so far to help out people who can't see a screen by putting in proper alt tags. It's really simple. So we'll go through that a little bit.
Yeah, we'll talk about that. We're still getting into, we just talked about the developer tool. So I popped up Chrome and we looked at, to see here in the elements elements tab of the developer tools, we can sort of see what we've already written in text. Google formats it for us in a particular way, uniform way. We can see all the things that are in the head. We can see all the things that are in the body. And thus far, the only actual elements that we've really talked about, I guess the meat and potatoes of HTML, the actual things the content we've looked at is H tags. So we have a little bit of a ways to go, but that's an important first step, I think, in actually getting your tools set up, your environment. You want a text editor, you want something like VS Code or Atom or Sublime Text. Any text editor will do, but these are sort of like the modern technologies, the modern tools. What's your text editor of choice?
I like Atom or Sublime.
Okay, yeah. Cool.
Or the CS50 IDE.
Yeah, CS50 IDE as well is an incredible tool. Lets you have sort of a Ubuntu infrastructure to mess around with too and get used to that environment if you're coming from PC or coming from Windows. But yeah, this is one of the big things. You need a text editor, you'll need Chrome, and with just those tools you can really get started working on HTML documents. Now, I'll read a couple questions in the chat, and then we'll proceed with the next few topics. We'll talk about paragraphs, which are also an important thing to look at. Gotta go soon, but I've been doing CS50 week 1. Stay peaceful. Good to have you. Thanks for coming. I use Atom as well, says Jack.ts. In my opinion, the best one for web development. I used to use Atom as well. It's a great text editor. Will topics like Django or React be covered in the CS50 course, not the current stream? The CS50 course, probably not Django, probably not React. We've certainly covered Flask, which is a micro framework, a bit smaller scale. Gives you more limited features, but it's a little bit easier to sort of bootstrap students who have no prior back-end web development. But probably not React and Django for CS50 core. However, there is web.cs50.org if anybody wants to go and check that out. So web.cs50. Wait, sorry, I think I had this wrong.
That's the one Brian teaches?
Yeah, web.cs50.edx.org, is that it? No, sorry. cs50.edx.org/web. I had that mixed up. So go to, one more time, cs50.edx.org/web. And this website is Brian Yu, who's often here in the chat actually with us. It's a Python and JavaScript course that he taught, and this course does use quite a bit of Django, and then cs50.org mobile teaches React. And so you can sort of get, if you take both courses, you can get kind of an encompassing view of that side of the web development landscape. And in in future streams, we'll definitely take a look at things like Django, things like React in more detail, and we did a stream with Brian on the basics of React. So there's definitely some resources out there, and we'll go more into detail in the future. Can you explain what the HTTP equiv is and how it works? Tried to figure it out now on my own, and it seems it has multiple applications. So let's go ahead. Do you know offhand what that is?
Equiv of what?
I believe it's a meta attribute in HTTP equiv. Let's go over here. It's a meta attribute.
Oh, okay.
HTTP equiv. So this isn't something that I use very often, but this is also a great opportunity for us to showcase w3schools.com, which you can look up pretty much anything related to HTML, to CSS, and even to JavaScript. They cover a lot of the basics. And also MDN, the Mozilla Developer Network, is a great resource. Go to developer.mozilla.org. You can type in, let's type in HTTP equiv here and see if that comes up.
This one tends to be not as user-friendly, right?
Yeah, it's not
It's got
quite,
great information.
more
though.
information, but
Yeah.
less, less sort of, ease of access. But we can see here, we can go to meta tag, and then I think we can go to equiv, right? Yeah, so permitted parents, meta char set, meta HTTP equiv, a head element. If HTTP equiv is not an encoding declaration, so a lot of this stuff is a little bit more niche and more, it's not really as pertinent to what you're seeing, the body of what you're seeing. It's more like metadata associated with the document that does something. For example, the prior page says that you can use this to refresh the document every 30 seconds by saying HTTP equiv equals refresh, the string refresh, and then give it another tag that says content equals 30. So that's a particular use case. Not something that I'm super familiar with, but we can look at the documents here and see probably a lot of the different ways you could use it. Content type, default style, refresh. Those look like the three main use cases for it. Define time interval for the document to refresh itself, specify the preferred style sheet to use, specify the character encoding for the document. And this is, I think, where I see it a little bit more frequently is the content type. Just giving it more information. I'm not sure offhand the best use cases for it, but the deeper you dive into it, I'm sure you'll find a reason for it. At the sort of trying to get away from maybe some of the more lower level niche use cases, we can go into, and this is something that just it'll provide to you by default because I guess this is a maximum support sort of compatibility feature. Let's go into more of the actual content. So we covered H tags, so headings, so things that allow us to specify I guess how pronounced maybe something is if we have like a title to our blog, or maybe an individual post has like a subtitle. Maybe that'll be like an H3 or something. It's kind of up to you, and again, you can style these as you wish in the future. But the actual content in which you're going to post a lot of text information is probably going to be in something like a P tag, a paragraph tag. Not necessarily, but this is a tag that's used very frequently for larger blocks of text information.
So, about the H tag thing, I was surprised like a couple months ago running like a web page I had through some accessibility checker, and we'll talk about that. Like I skipped H2 tags because I just didn't like the way they're formatted out of the box. I wanted like an H3 tag, and it's like, dude, you don't have an H2 tag. And that's like not good. Apparently, just for the semantics of the document, if you have an H1, you have to have an H2 before you have an H3.
So I guess they assume a hierarchical use of the headings. Okay,
yeah, so you shouldn't be
that makes
skipping.
sense. That actually makes sense.
Yeah.
It's a good point to bring up too, and you certainly have a lot of insight, and that's a really interesting, sorry, just reading the favorite resource. W3 Schools. Yeah, definitely a great resource. And then Meowcat saying another Mac, and I think somebody else mentioned up earlier, made a reference to how Macs look really nice. I don't remember where.
But I can run Windows on it. For the main software I use, it's called ArcGIS, and it only runs on Windows. So.
Do you have a VMware?
I use Parallels. I used to use VMware,
okay.
but yeah, it's.
Gotcha. So let's go ahead and, what I could do is I could say, blah, 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 and showcase what this looks like. And I'm actually going to do that for now. Elorki112048, thank you very much for the follow. And Theosis, thank you very much for the follow as well. Look, somebody's used ArcGIS, or ArcGIS.
ArcGIS.
ArcGIS,
yeah.
okay.
Although there is debate whether it's ArcGIS or not, but I'm an ArcGIS guy.
Okay, yeah. I gotcha. I have no familiarity.
And seeing as though it doesn't really matter, we really argue about it. Because it just doesn't matter. But
yes, it's like the paint shed, or the painting the shed argument or whatever. Like people spend a disproportionate amount of time debating small details.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just paint the shed.
It's an amazing. Yeah, just paint the shed.
Don't worry about the nail sticking out somewhere. Yeah. Okay.
For a crime mapping course, it's very cool. Said Adamantium.
Ooh.
Yeah, Malcolm says, I want to.
And by the way, somebody asked, is Brian in chat now? Actually, Brian, we have him locked up under the table. He's doing our homework for us. Once he's done, we're going to release him, and he'll be in the chat. No. Sorry, Brian, if you're out there.
No, I don't think Brian is in the chat necessarily today, but he does pop by every once in a while. We're trying to get him on another stream, which would be great. So we can see that I typed in a bunch of stuff in my p tag here, a paragraph, short for paragraph, and it rendered here onto the screen. I'm going to do that. I'm going to do a little bit more just so that we can see it wrap. So I want to see some word wrapping here. And indeed, it does wrap quite a bit, and it looks like it wrapped in a weird sort of, it wrapped on a space. And that's why it looks sort of like two separate lines. It's actually, there's a space here, and this is so long that it looks like it wrapped in a weird way, or that is two separate tags. But paragraph tags are an excellent way to sort of include text. But sort of drawing text out like that isn't a great way to illustrate sort of large, actual real world blocks of code, or blocks of text rather. And so something that's great, a lot of people use, is what's called lorem ipsum text. And this is just basically Latin words put together in a random way to make text that looks roughly like what text you would see in the real world on an actual web page. So Saloner7, thank you very much for the follow. And CeelyCN, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, probably not. Thank you very much for the follow as well. So I'm going to generate 5 paragraphs, and you can see here it just gives you a bunch of text here on the screen. I'm going to copy this. I'm just going to copy these two here. Rather, I'm just going to copy one paragraph at a time. I'm going to copy this, go ahead and over here, go into my p tag, and then copy that. And then I'm going to do the same thing. And actually what I should do is I should enforce wrapping. So I'm going to toggle word wrap so we can actually see that here as a paragraph. Semantically, it sort of makes sense. That's a paragraph that we're using.
Actually, I was making a website once for a client, and I sent them like a dummy mock-up of the site that contained this lorem ipsum dolor mit sum thing. And they were really concerned. They're like, what does this mean?
Like, is this programming?
No.
Is this what programming looks like?
I guess I had never seen it before. I'm like, oh yeah, that's just, you know, placeholder text. That's faux Latin, I guess.
Yeah, it's faux Latin. I mean, it's real Latin, but it's put together in a way that's fixed.
So if like Caesar were here, he'd be like,
what? He'd be like, it's like somebody saying cat, dog, was, green, elephant, works.
Okay.
You know, just random words and conjugations of stuff.
Cool. Integer's in there. I just saw integer.
Integer's a Latin word.
Yeah.
I'm not 100% sure what it means. Integer, Latin for
whole number.
Intact or whole, right? Because whole numbers, integer, a whole number.
That's so cool.
The TIL on stream, integer is Latin for whole. I actually didn't know that either. Site is entirely in English for you. Perhaps edX has auto-translated for you based on your location. In any event, the course is in English. OMG Busta, a number. When you click on the enroll button to sign up, it's not in English. Is the course in English? Oh, I'm actually not sure. But to Brenda's point, it's definitely in English. I'm not sure if your browser settings are set such that they are different.
Wait, is that Curious Kiwi, like the Curious Kiwi I know?
Yep, that's the Curious Kiwi that you know.
Brenda.
Yep.
What's up? Is Glenn out there too? Okay, so I don't know if you ever take like CS50 or the edX version. Hey, oh my gosh. Oh, so we're actually interacting. There are people who man the discussion boards, and Brenda is like just like the boss.
Yeah, Brenda's all over the place.
Just incredible replies all the time. Okay.
Monge1H, thank you very much for the follow. OMG Bus is from the UK. It was actually, that's interesting then. I'm not so sure why it's in a different language. Have you used require wants for including the headers in an init file? Oh, it's talking about to somebody else. Okay, in the chat. Can you make HTML modular so that you don't have to repeat the footer and the header? I've always had this problem when making websites, something that's on the client side. I know PHP includes. Raw HTML, not as much, but for templating engines such as Jinja, which we use with Flask, and for many other, like for example, what's it called? I think it's Handlebars that's used for Node, but there are other ones. Jade is a good one. There are a lot of these features that are higher level, that are things that a parser looks at and bundles it all together and then sends it to your web browser, but raw HTML needs to be in one document. You can render subsections of HTML pages, says Andre. Don't you know Latin, says Bavik? Unfortunately, I do not.
Problissunum.
Problissunum. I'm actually not sure what.
I don't know what it means.
Something one. But,
Problissunum.
but yeah, we have 2 paragraphs. Did I copy them over successfully? I think I did. I'm going to go over here, go back to our tab, refresh. And you'll notice an interesting thing about paragraphs, and this actually ties back to what we looked at with headers, and that's that paragraphs, like headers, are block level elements, and that they basically exist on a new line in their own block, so to speak, that spans the entire width of the web page. And this is referring to non-styled blocks. You can style blocks to take up percentages of the web page with CSS, but when you just use block level elements as is, they take up the entire width of the page. So yeah, that's a cool thing. Paragraph tags, even if they are right after each other, even if we were to put, say, this paragraph tag over here and immediately start all of this text on this line, they're still going to have a space, and I can demonstrate this. I can put this like that, right? There's no new line at all, no new line in our actual text file. And even to further illustrate this, I'll do that. So it immediately goes right into the next paragraph, but if I save it and refresh the page, nothing changed whatsoever. So our actual text file is not related whatsoever to the styling of the HTML.
Question. So like HTML ignores spaces, right?
Yep.
But it doesn't ignore space between words, because that would really be awful.
Yep.
Because all the words are running together.
Yep.
What if you put like just a single space between those, and would it actually be rendered, or does it realize it's just, we wouldn't even be able to see it though, right?
Yep, we wouldn't be able to see it. It's not within a tag, so I guess because it has no semantic meaning. I mean, I think text does, but spaces do not.
Okay.
So text itself, so if we were to type Colton, it's between the paragraphs and it should still render it, but it still, for some reason, spaces because it's part of the parsing of the document. It doesn't actually render the space. It just renders. Now, what you can do is you can use an HTML escape character for it, and I don't remember offhand what it is. I think it's that.
Oh yeah. Breaking
sorry,
space.
And I'm not 100% sure if that's correct. No, that's not correct. It's some.
NBSP?
It's some other. Let's see. HTML escape car space. Which characters need to be escaped in HTML? Do you have a representation?
Nah.
I'm trying to see if it has the space. It does not have the space. These are HTML escape characters are important, and it's something that you also need when you're, for example, encoding a URL, because you can't have a space in your URL. For example, if I want to go to www.
The one I said about a minute ago.
NBSP.
Yeah.
Okay, nice, well done.
Thank you.
NBSP. And also another thing that's cool. VS Code actually colors it, so we could.
It knows, yeah.
Contextually, it knows. So let's go back here.
By the way, what are you using?
Do that, and there is indeed. It's hard to see it, but there's a space in front of my C. What am I using? The text editor?
Yeah.
A VS Code.
Oh, okay, cool.
So it's very similar to Atom. It's kind of a slightly newer than Atom, but it's developed by Microsoft actually.
Cool.
Completely free. Super well supported, actively developed. They have a massive team of people that are constantly developing it. So it's
Just
great.
to render text.
Yes, just to render text.
Okay.
And what was I going to say? I was going to make a point about it.
Obviously, it's more than just rendering text.
A little bit less memory intensive than Atom is, which is nice.
Atom, yeah.
Atom uses a ton of memory because it's effectively a virtual browser rendering a bunch of text.
Yep.
VS Code is as well, but they somehow or other have mitigated a little bit of that memory usage. Our HTML tags case sensitive. Let's try it out and find out. So let's go ahead and type a P here and a P here. And if I go back here, translate this page, nope, not translate it, render it. It seems that it is case sensitive. Right? No, it's not case sensitive. Sorry, I thought I deleted my name. It is not case sensitive. So P, and we saw this earlier actually when we made doc type lowercase.
Doc type versus doc type.
Yeah. There is no case sensitivity. It's conventional to use lowercase letters over uppercase characters, probably because it's just easier to type them out. But indeed.
What's up with that? Like, some people use the all caps for doc type, and I just like the small one. And it sometimes will format it with all caps even after you're done.
I'm not sure. I think habitually I use uppercase doc type, but lowercase would be semantically or syntactically more consistent with the way that we use all the other tags, which are all lowercase. Right?
So maybe it's like it's a special tag.
I guess maybe it is kind of special because it's the very first big tag, and it's saying, oh, doc type, you know.
Is it even a tag technically?
Is it even a tag?
Is it a declaration, an incantation, perhaps?
Because this exclamation point might be, well, it technically is a tag.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure whether it's necessarily the doc type or whether it's the exclamation point as a special definition tab or something.
Cool.
We can see doc type, tag type.
For those of you who might have been around before HTML5, these incantations that came before were just awful. Remember, like the XHTML and those long things you had to copy and paste.
Interesting.
Oh.
It is not an HTML tag as per W3 Schools. So it is an instruction to the web browser about what version of HTML the page is written in. And in this case, it's I guess it says wait, no, refers to a DTD, rules for markup language. So it's HTML5.
All right.
Oh, right, okay. So I'm trying to see what the HTML4 one was, because here's the HTML4 one. So very much longer, much less elegant than the HTML5 doc type declaration, I would say. But no, it's not technically. Now, syntactically, I guess it is a tag, but it's not technically a tag.
Cool.
It doesn't have a close. It doesn't have content that it refers to. It's just something the browser is looking for as it's parsing, I guess. It's saying, analyze these bytes if they equal this sort of thing.
I've never tried it, but what if you don't put that in? Does it default your browser to like HTML5?
So my understanding is that it does. So if we do this and then I save, Chrome should, by default, just render it the exact same. So I actually rendered it slightly differently.
Interesting. Yeah, that default CSS that comes with it with HTML5, I guess doesn't. Well, not really HTML5.
That's fascinating. I haven't looked too into detail on the differences there.
We will put that on.
But there is a slight bit of spacing at the very top in the situation that you don't include the doc type there.
Cool.
So beyond just the, I guess, semantic value of it, there is a little bit of style associated with it.
I'm reading the comments here. Duck type. That's funny.
I used to code emails in HTML tables. Oof. Man, that must have been terrible. Yeah, HTML4 doc types were annoying. Remember the metadata, post or get requests. If your file is doc type HTML, will be HTML page for the browser. Yep. I once had to write code for email template, and it was so painful. I'm guessing, HTML, I'm guessing. I'm interested in web dev, so watching the stream to get educated. Thanks for this. Absolutely, Meowcat. Thanks for tuning in. Jacob Jason says, I saw this live stream where users were able to format the chat with style tags on one guy's channel. Interesting. I'll have to take a look at that. If you can link the stream or the VOD, I'd be curious to see what that is. Might be able to integrate something like that. I think it's good standards to keep to lowercase, no? Yeah, definitely good. I would say definitely good standards. I've never seen anybody in real world use case use capitalized tags for the body. I mean, for the doc type, yeah, I think that's common.
It would be like shouting, right?
Yeah. But I think the doc type, even in CS50, I think we use the lowercase doc type. I think David has in lecture. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not 100% sure. I don't want to speak on behalf of what David's done. Offhand. Whoops, I accidentally turned on my space heater here. I'll turn that off. I think I definitely like the look of it, but I think from a standards point of view, it makes more sense to see in caps, I guess. I don't know. But
they're in the tag, so I don't know. SQL that comes up with quite a bit. Do you ever have a SQL stream? Like where you'll have like select star from. In SQL, I really like to see caps. Just because that's what I'm used to.
That's what you're used
but
to.
you don't need it, apparently?
You can do it in lowercase, yeah.
HTML.
David and I did a SQL stream, actually, a while ago. That was like 2 months ago. But we covered the basics of it. I think we used caps, though.
I was hoping we were doing like the Pokemon, or not the Pokemon, the Pac-Man or the Donkey Kong or something today. But this is cool, too. But I do like games.
This is a little bit tamer than that. Thanks, eMadden and Mewell for following, and Kitalsi, I'm not sure, and Keyroll. I'm not sure if I caught any of those, actually. I apologize.
Oh yeah.
I think I missed a few. Yeah.
Somebody was talking about coding with frame or tables. I just took a course and it was a CSS course and our final project is we had to do all this formatting in or using floats. I don't know if you've ever. We're not talking about CSS today, but it's kind of like that table-y sort of hack. To get things to lay out, and then we were given the privilege of using grid and flex afterwards.
Oh, and Flexbox, yeah.
It was so much nicer. Floats just, boo.
Yeah, floats. Yeah. We'll probably cover that actually in our CSS stream, floats. But then I do want to cover CSS or Flexbox and other things, more modern styling conventions as well. Cool. Isn't it just related to the comment that's meant to be? It's not the same thing as a comment, Bavik, but you can kind of maybe lump them into a parsing sort of category. The browser's looking for that sort of exclamation point and doing certain behavior depending on what's in that tag. If it's a comment with dash dash, then it's going to ignore it. But if it's doc type, if it sees doc type, then it knows to parse the rest of it as HTML. Cool. All right, so I apologize if I'm not hitting every single comment. So H1 Privet, thank you for joining. But let's get into, I think, some more of the actual content of the HTML, because we have a long ways to go still. Let's take a look at some crude, basic styling. So now we have, we have our P tags here, our paragraph tags, and actually the. Wait, let me. I thought I had this styled a little bit differently, but it looks like I might have screwed it up. Oh no, I didn't. I just need to do that. So we have our paragraph tags, one's capitalized, to illustrate that you can capitalize tags, but let's just say don't do that.
Feels weird. Yeah.
And keep them all lowercase. And someone asked if we could point out more conventions during the course or during the stream. I'll try if I can think of any off the top of my head. I'll definitely do some. I know we have alt as that's a convention for accessibility.
I think one thing that maybe we can talk about later once we make this page is to run it through a validator.
Oh, sure.
Because that would enforce, well, the convention of have you actually done the HTML tags correctly. And I highly recommend that because it's so easy to miss a tag, closing a tag or something, or doing something illegal.
We pointed to earlier the fact that modern text editors, and this is a luxury we get now, but this hasn't always necessarily been the case. You can type something like H1, for example, in VS Code or even in Atom, and it'll just close it for you, which kind of mitigates that issue. But that's not to say that you're immune from the issue, because you could easily come out over here and say, oh, I want to write some content here instead, and then forget to close the H1 because you overwrote what the text editor is trying to do to help you out, I guess.
And one of the things I always run into trouble with HTML is it's not like you're running Python where you might run your program and get errors in your terminal. Here it's like, it just goes.
Exactly. It's going to keep rendering until it reaches the end of the HTML file. There is no browser sort of error thing, because to make things user friendly for users, they don't want error messages popping up saying, "Oh, your HTML is invalid," right? Yeah. It's going to try its best to render it. You might get console errors for JavaScript, but those are hidden from the user. The user's not going to see what those are, and we're not going to cover JavaScript today.
So using a validator is one way of sort of like getting feedback on mistakes you have in your code.
At least knowing that you haven't screwed something simple up. Yeah. You might have screwed up your own styling as a result of CSS being messed up, but that's a whole separate ballpark. Colton, how'd you get around solving a CS problem where you were stuck for a long time? Sorry for the off-topic question, but I'm going through that phase, which also is leading to procrastination. Is Ash Foxayad. It comes a lot with practice. The more problems you solve, the more instinct you sort of get in terms of like what could be going wrong, depending. And it really, this is such a general thing to look at too. And there's so many different kinds of problems. First thing that I like to typically do, and definitely share your thoughts on this as well, is insert print statements into my code and look at variables. And if I have a debugger, use the debugger as well to see what my variables are. And if you have a frame-by-frame debugger, or rather cycle-by-cycle debugger, analyze every single step, every instruction in your program to see if variables are changing in the way that you expect. But the more visually you can make your program sort of give you feedback and tell you that your variables are equaling the correct values at the right time, the more you can sort of narrow down where things are going wrong. Because a lot of the time it just ends up being something is getting assigned the wrong value.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, I mean the print statement is, I love print statements. If you do have a debugger that you can run, like if you're running the CS50 IDE, you can step through your code and see things that are happening, variables, how they're changing. That's awesome too. But I just go to a print statement right away.
Yeah.
But it was just, we were just having the Python like little workshop for the lawyers course, and it was funny, like somebody had get a syntax error and like it's giving you an error on a line. And because I've seen this so many times, my first thought was like, what's going on in the line above there? Right. And they had missed like a parenthesis and kind of a long line, and it's very easy to miss those. But I think, like watching David in lecture, like he'll, come across something and like maybe he'll get a syntax error because he's just coding it live. The thing that it's like really impressive is like you can imagine going through the catalog of things he's seen before, and within a few seconds, usually he's just like, oh yeah, I forgot this. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
And, I mean, you're like that with this stuff too, but I'm like, yeah, I want to be like that someday.
I think you brought up a very good point. You're looking at, sort of like not necessarily to where you think the problem is. Maybe something is, maybe your error is happening at a print statement, saying result equals something and it's the wrong value.
Yeah.
Or it's breaking at some line. But usually the problem is higher than where you think the problem might be instinctively at a first glance. Yeah. So looking up above rather than, spending too much time at the exact problem or below the problem, that's definitely, I think, great intuition, a great way a good heuristic to follow to at least solve programming problems. C was a nightmare. I didn't even watch all 5 weeks of C in CS50, says Jacob Chasen. Yeah, it was. It's a bit more work, but I mean that's the foundation of all modern software, right?
I'm totally like, I know that feeling, right? Because like I had studied Python before I took CS50, right? And I mean Python makes it pretty easy, frankly, to do stuff like just operations on a string, let's say, right? C is just right? And for the first few weeks, I was like, you gotta be kidding me. Is this broken? And, but the really cool thing, like if you do work through, and if you do make it through the C stuff, you might have seen the lecture where, well, is it PSET 4 or 5, where we do Speller, the spell checker?
PSET 5, I think?
It's, in fall 2008, it became 4, but it's probably
yes,
5 in the online course, the current
correct.
online.
That is correct.
And like, it feels really good to get it done, but you probably got like 150 or 200 lines of code in C that you've written, right? And then David has this moment in lecture, like when he's introducing Python, and he just basically, just from scratch, writes 20 lines of Python code that implements Speller, right?
We did it on stream too.
You did it on stream, okay, yeah, so then you've seen this before if you attended then. And it's like, I mean, Sanders, at least, they're all like, whoa, yo, you know, and also groaning that they had to go through all this stuff. But, and maybe you do this too, if you actually run the code, the C's faster. Okay, so
Much
there
faster.
are reasons that, yeah, I know it's like not as easy, like so it might seem like a nightmare, but pedagogically there are reasons you're starting with C.
Yeah.
So just hang in there, that's all I can say. There's a lot of support out there, you know, the forums, everything, that you can definitely get help to make it through there, and it's worth the struggle.
Illustration of pros and cons as applies to, I mean, in this case, 2 different domains of programming altogether, but you can extrapolate that to Python versus Ruby, which may have very similar runtime performance.
Okay.
Different languages have different pros and cons. Maybe there's a way to do something in Python that's very easy, but in Ruby it's not as easy, and Ruby might have a syntax that makes something that would take a lot of work in Python, you know, quite a bit easier in Ruby.
Absolutely.
Pros and cons is universal, and it particularly illustrated between a low-level and a high-level programming language. Layers of abstraction really kind of disappearing at that point.
Yep.
Okay, so we have 2 paragraph tags here, and I apologize again if I missed the some comments here, but let me just take a brief look, make sure I'm not missing any questions. Ashfaq, no problem whatsoever. Everybody's kind of saying, yep, PSET 4 now in edX.
We don't have a moderator here, so just ignore some of the comments.
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
Why are there 2 versions? Maybe there is more about CS50 Introduction to Web Dev. CS51 Introduction to Web Dev. 2 versions.
I think what they're saying is like they're branded as CS50, but there's like the CS50, then there's the web dev, then there's JavaScript.
Sure,
There's
yeah.
the game development, which you probably know about.
Those are sort of spin-off courses that specialize more in a particular domain. For example, my course is a games course. Brian taught a web course, and Jordan taught a mobile/React Native course. And those are all meant to sort of do a deeper dive on topics we just don't have time to cover in CS50, because programming, the world of programming is, to say it's massive is an understatement. There's just way too many technologies, way too many languages, ways of thinking, ways of solving problems, and you can spend years just going down one rabbit hole. And we just don't have the time to cover that, but we do have many folks who have different skill sets who like to teach and who want to provide more of the sort of the CS50 spirit in terms of other courses, and so that's sort of the reason we have all those other courses. All right, let's go ahead and now talk not about paragraphs, but let's use the paragraphs we have to talk about things related to the very rudimentary styling of elements. DD92, thank you very much for the follow. So the 2 tags really that I want to focus on for this for now are the M tags. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. M for emphasis, right? And this is something that is very similar to, say, Microsoft Word, where you might want to emphasize a given word in a sentence. You want to italicize it.
Yeah, what's the old school way of doing this, the non-right way of doing this in HTML? Anybody in chat? Like, the M tag is the correct, semantically correct tag, but what's the wrong way of doing this? Anybody?
Yeah, it takes a few minutes. And actually, offhand, I might not even know the answer immediately, because I know I tags are now used as icons.
It changed, right? It would be like the italics tag, which used to be used. So you'll see that popping up sometimes, but people like still have like I tags when they don't mean, it's not what they think it means anymore, but it used to be I, right? And the same thing with the bold,
okay, so
right?
I does still define italic text, but it's now also icons, right?
Yep.
That's what the current I is?
I think it's something.
Just so I'm not going crazy. HTML I tag.
It's got to be deprecated for the use that I was just referring to. And the same thing with bold, which
Yeah, that's
we're probably
interesting.
gonna talk about. No, bold would be. Does anybody know what bold is?
I guess maybe people use it as I and they override the CSS to not be, because all it is just font styling italic, and they just use it as an icon rendering.
Strong. That's
Strong.
right.
Yeah, strong is for bold text.
Yeah, and this is, I mean, from an accessibility perspective, like when you say bold, what you mean is like fat font on a screen. But when you say strong, you mean bold, right?
Yeah.
But like you're strengthening it. And same
Yeah.
thing with, you're emphasizing something by italicizing it.
The two kind of have a semantic similarity, but ultimately it kind of comes down to your taste, the way you want to get a point across, I guess. But we can see here, if I put this consecutor word in EM tags, emphasis tags, another fancy way of saying italicized text, italicized tags, and I refresh the page, we can indeed see that the text over here, and it keeps asking me if I want to translate, and I don't. And I'm actually going to get rid of the developer tools and zoom in just a little bit. This word right here, consecutor, which we just looked at, is indeed italicized. And this is just default styling on HTML, raw HTML, but you could easily define the way that you want EM to work in your code. Perhaps you want the font to get larger, perhaps you want the color to change, perhaps you want it to have a different background, perhaps you actually want it to get bold and italicized. All these things are things that you can do with CSS, which we're not going to look at today, but that is a way to get some rudimentary sort of styling in your application. And another thing, notice that when we use the EM tag around this word consecutor, it didn't add any spacing, first of all, so it's still preserving the spacing of all of our text. And it also didn't create a new line. It actually kept everything in the same line as the paragraph text already was. Oscuro87, thank you very much for the follow. And so this illustrates, again, the difference between inline elements, which is what this is. Notice you can kind of think of it as it's on the same line, it's in line with the rest of the text. Versus block level elements. Block level meaning that it creates an entire block and then spaces down below it when it's finished, right? And that's what this paragraph text is. It's a block level element. The EM tag is an inline element, so it doesn't actually give us a new line. What is the difference between italic and oblique, says Digicresta. Oblique, what is, I actually don't know offhand. Oblique type, that slants slightly to the right, used for the same purpose as italic type. Unlike italic type, however, it does not use different glyph shapes. It uses the same glyphs as Roman type, except slanted. Oh.
Cool.
Interesting. I didn't know that. That's a TIL for me today. No one will do so. Appreciate no problem. Okay, cool. And so people in the chat have also made reference to the other tag we just talked about, which was the strong tag. So if I put, for example, lorem, sorry, if I put lorem, lorem in a strong tag, and then I refresh the page, we can see that it indeed does bold our text. And the words that we typically say are bold and italic in the world of HTML, emphasized and strong. Those are just what's the word I'm looking for? Conventions that the HTML has decided to adopt for the way that it represents its tag, the semantic meaning there, or I guess rather the syntactic meaning there, not so much the semantic meaning. We'll look at semantic tags a little bit later. But those are two that you'll see a lot. And again, often you will not use the exact styling that you get for raw HTML, but you do get the ability with CSS to style things custom the way that you would like. OMG Busta, thank you very much for the follow. Ooh. Anything you'd like to add to what we just talked about? It's pretty simple stuff.
Sounds good.
Okay, anybody has any questions so far? I know this stuff is kind of simple, it's slow paced, but we want to just make sure everything is very foundationally built upon so that future streams kind of make sense. But yeah, we covered P tags, paragraph tags, EM tags, and strong tags. Why don't we get into hypertext? But did you have something you wanted to talk about?
One thing I was going to say, and we'll do this maybe as a wrap up. There's interesting question of like the popularity of tags, right? Because there's some really rare tags that you're never going to probably use, right?
Yeah.
And before the stream here, I was looking up online some of analysis that's been done on the frequency of tags, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later when we're done.
Yeah, that's great.
You really want to learn the ones that are used on like 98% of web pages.
Yep.
Right?
And we'll actually cover, I think, every single one of those today. Yeah, we're going to cover every single one of those tags. So that's good. That's good to hear. I feel vindicated for the outline that I set up. Why did tabs get converted to spaces in P tags? Says Drew 4. That's a good question. Let's look it up. So a lot of these things you can just Google. I don't know the answer to everything when it comes to anything, but especially in web development. And so I use Google all the time, and I recommend that if you don't use Google for a lot of stuff, for all these questions, get into the habit of doing it, because Google really, you can find pretty much anything on Google.
You know, my TF, I loved my TF for CS50, and the one thing he said, like I met him for drinks after the course, after the hackathon and the fair, and I was like, I'll leave him nameless, but you know, Mr. X, I mean, like, man, you knew like everything in section. How did you get to be so smart? And he's like, did you notice like I often didn't share my camera? And I'm like, yeah, I thought that was a little bit different. He's like, that's because like I was always Googling things. And I'm like, oh. He's like, yeah, just Google stuff. That will save you.
I'll be shameless about how much I Google. I think everybody in the world of development, Googling is ubiquitous. Everybody here that works at CS50 is a great, excellent, very skilled Googler. It's a skill in the modern era for web development, for any development, for any I think field probably requires you to Google. And thanks Stuck1L, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. Thank you very much for following. But we can say to Drew questions, I'll just write it as a question. Why do tabs get converted to spaces HTML? And we have a Stack Exchange question here at the very top. Stack Exchange and Stack Overflow are excellent resources for finding out answers. Googling or Stack Overflowing, says Askuro. Yes, exactly. Okay.
And a shout out to Bing.
Let me see. Oh, this one actually didn't get an answer. Really? You can bypass this question. Okay, I think this is a Python question, actually. I apologize. That's a Python. That's a Python.
You know, actually, maybe this goes back to like the first web page I ever made. I remember I had done sort of desktop publishing stuff, right? So like, well, I mean Word, obviously, but also let's say InDesign, where you have complete control over where your text is going to be on a screen relative to figures, whatever. When I made a web page, I was like, no, you gotta be kidding me. I can't control like the space between these paragraphs without CSS, which I didn't know then. And I ended up like tabbing the heck out of stuff to get spaces. So I never realized, like I don't do that anymore. We use CSS, obviously, if you wanna do things like that, but, or enter the code for a non-breaking space if you really do want spaces in a row. But yeah, maybe it's just default for tabs, just give you a space, because I did hack it that way incorrectly.
Yeah, people on, I mean, it doesn't look like there's a clear answer. We'd have to do a deeper dive, I think, onto the HTML spec, but it seems like, based on what I'm reading on Stack Overflow, at least per this person's comment, and this is just one person's comment, that there is not actually a tab in HTML, and what he might mean is that there's no standardized way to render tabs across browsers. Browsers have, the HTML spec has not defined that /t, or the ASCII character code for t should be rendered in a consistent way, and so therefore they don't get rendered in a consistent way. We'll accept that answer for now. It may not be 100% accurate, and again, we'd have to look at the HTML spec and really dig in to understand why that's the case. But there are solutions to get around it. So people are saying wrap the content in a pre-tag, which looks like it's a way to parse \n and t to render them appropriately. So there are ways to get around it, but the raw HTML data, the ASCII bytes that it expects to exist in your HTML document as it's served to you over the internet, that does not get translated to textual representation in the web browser. So that's just my interpretation of what I'm reading online. So excellent question. One of those things that you could spend an hour probably digging into stuff to figure out the low-level reasons why something exists that way.
Sure.
Bootstrap is a dream come true. I agreed. We're going to do a Bootstrap stream in the future. Yep. So jot that down, or at least hold me accountable for that. Okay, cool. So we did P tags, M tags, strong tags. The next thing that I wanted to talk about was the whole basis of HTML, or rather markup itself, and that's hypertext.
Ooh, yes.
So hypertext is a really important thing in web programming, which basically means connecting different documents, right? Mm-hmm. If I want Google, for example, if we're on Google, let's say I'm on Google Images, images.google.com, and I type in cats, so this is one page, right, of a bunch of cats, and these aren't actually very happy-looking cats. Unfortunately, these are pretty sad-looking cats for the most part.
Go to that like cat in the suit thing, like shaved. It was like 20 years ago, and meme thing.
Cat in a suit.
Well, he's shaved cat. Well, we better be careful because who knows what's going to come up. But
I think
yeah,
I probably have safe search on. I think it's a default setting.
Excellent,
I'm not
excellent,
sure.
excellent. Okay.
But you can see that we have all of these pictures of cats, but maybe I want to find out more information about any given one of these pictures. This page on its own isn't necessarily that useful. I mean, it arguably is depending on what you're looking for, but maybe I'm looking for a bit more information on one of these pictures, for example. And it's impossible to include the information about everything into one page for most things, I would say. But we can, thanks to the power of what's called hypertext, click on this picture or this link here and get taken to someone else's web page on the World Wide Web and get more information, get a page served to us from a completely different location on the internet.
Can you imagine, like, before we had this?
It would have been rough.
I mean, like...
I mean, at that point, you're looking...
I was alive then, but, like...
Libraries.
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah.
And I think ARPANET was before you were born.
Yeah, in '70 I was born, but still.
Oh, maybe ARPANET was '73. I'm not 100%.
I touched punch cards when I was young, but still.
ARPANET. I don't remember offhand when it... '67. Oh, it's a concept published in '67,
Okay.
Implemented in '69.
Yeah, but
So, before your time.
Yeah, but this idea of clicking on something is so natural to us now, but yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's great. It's a great concept, and it's crazy to think that there are people implementing this, implementing this sort of theoretically and then tangibly, and that now this is the basis upon which we live. Everything in the world is connected because of this idea that you can click something and get information on it instantaneously, right? And that's what HTML, the backbone of HTML is, to say that some picture or some link links to, it acts as a hyperlink, and hyper not meaning large, but rather, I looked this up earlier, and hypertext means something more akin to beyond, not large.
Oh, like hypersonic, beyond
Like,
sound. Sort of. This is real Latin.
Over or beyond. Yeah, or Greek in this case.
Oh. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Oh.
Super comes from Latin, though.
Oh, so Superman is. Oh, okay. Yeah.
Super
Hyper sounds better. Well.
Yeah, hyper beam. If you're a Pokemon fan, have you played Pokemon?
Well, no, my kids. Yeah.
Pokemon?
Yeah, I've been through it.
Pokemon?
Yeah. I've been Pokemon.
But yeah.
We should do this in Japanese.
Oh yeah, no, that you could do it in Japanese. I could not do this in Japanese. But hypertext means over or beyond. So you can sort of think about going beyond the link, beyond a URL or some other representation of something in your page, be it an image or text, whatnot. But it allows you to transcend the limitation, the domain in which you are currently viewing the web page. So let's say I wanted to link to google.com, or maybe cs50.harvard.edu. Maybe I want this to be a landing page where people can come, and I want them to also know about CS50. So I say, click this link, and you can actually get access to a web page that David wrote at cs50.harvard.edu, right? So how would I actually do that? And it's actually very easy to do that. And I'm actually going to make it the most prominent, or at least maybe not most prominent, but the very first thing that people see when they get into the page. I'm going to say, I'm going to say this is going to be an anchor tag. And I got to look up the exact reason why they call it anchor tag. Anchor tag meaning?
Oh,
so,
good question.
Link to another page. Obviously, it's a link to another page, but...
You know, it's like, you remember like the old Microsoft Word where like you'd have like an anchor for like an image? And like stuff would float around it and stuff.
Sure.
It was really hard for me to figure out how it actually worked. But maybe it's like in this place on the page, you are anchoring something here.
I guess so. And then you can follow that anchor to get to another ship or another web page. I guess you can sort of visually construct that in your mind. Burak and Mango Zero and Amru Mustafa 97. Thank you very much for the follow. Oh, we got some Nihongo in the chat there. Let me see.
Yeah, hanasemasu yo.
Nihongo
Domo.
hanasemasu ka? I mean, can you speak Japanese?
Konnichiwa. Iie. Google Translate's awesome, isn't it? Don't read that one. That's not a good one. We're gonna have to get somebody active in the moderation over there if we can, please. Thanks.
Which one?
I see. Yeah. We won't go there. Anyway, hi. So.
All right. So let me see what else we got here.
Kawaii.
Cool mapping. Kawaii, a Japanese word I know.
Yes. Okay.
Kawaii is very good. And kawaii, which means scary, right?
Kawaii means scary, yes. So she's
you
either
want to be very careful
cute or scary,
you want
yes.
to be careful which one of those you use.
And a fun fact, like if you want to say something looks cute, like you can say kawaiso, but that's actually a mistake. It means it's pathetic.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Kawaiso.
Yeah, and like I did that with a baby once. I was like, oh, what a cute looking baby, but it's like, what a pathetic baby. I quickly learned that that's...
What was the way you get around that? Do you say kawaiso and you like announce?
Kawaii. You don't say that it looks cute, it just is cute. Anyway, but yeah.
Kawaii desu.
Kawaii. Yeah.
Okay.
So anyway, but
Japanese
yeah. So
lesson.
I called the baby pathetic. That was really a low point in my Japanese history.
But how would you say something can you not say something seems cute? Can you say like, because I've definitely seen what you're talking about, and someone said that there's a way to get around it.
Yeah, we probably could. Let's talk about that over beers.
Yeah, let's do that. Maybe defer that to another conversation. Anyway, HTML, anchoring. So anchoring, as we've sort of illustrated, and this might not be the original intended use case for this tag, or at least the mental construction for this tag, but you can sort of think of it as there's an anchor at this clickable thing on the page, and if you follow where the anchor is, it goes to some other web page, right? So and then I'm going to say href, and this is short for hyperreference. And what this does, or hypertext reference, I'm not 100% sure, but the href is actually what this anchor is anchored to, right? And so I can say http://https://cs50.harvard.edu. It takes in a URL much like you would type in your browser, and I can say CS50 is awesome. So notice that I did a couple of things. I wrapped some text, just like I did with the p tag, right? The paragraph tag wrapped a body of text, a bunch of text. And I not only included an a tag, but within this a tag, I didn't close it right away. I actually typed a space, and then I typed what's called an attribute. And we've seen attributes already so far, but just haven't talked about them in tremendous detail. For example, a meta tag can usually have a series of attributes, and you can define custom tags, which have custom attributes when you get into JavaScript. But for right now, we're just going to use with what's included in the HTML spec. And with anchor tags, you get this attribute called href. And the href is basically some metadata that gets assigned to this tag, which tells it where to go when you click the link. So I'm going to refresh the page. I'm going to go over. I have a lot of tabs now. We've gone on some rabbit holes. We can clearly see that I have actually visited CS50's page already, which is why it's purple. Chrome styles pages that you visited already as being purple and blue. I believe blue by default, light blue. We can illustrate this with another a tag shortly. And if I click on this tag, notice that first of all, on the bottom left of my screen, there is a URL that pops up in a little panel there, which kind of just gives you a hint that says this is where you're going to go if you click on this link. And this is a good way to sort of bypass sort of nefarious websites trying to get people to click on links and go and do all sorts of stuff. David's mentioned this in certain lectures. But we'll trust that I have programmed this not nefariously, and I indeed get taken not to a page that I have written, although I have written part of it. I did, fun fact, write the staff page, which is really cool. Check that out.
Okay, cool.
Using an awesome library called Masonry, so a bunch of images of all our teaching fellows. So some pretty cool Bootstrap mixed with Masonry stuff. But this is a page that's largely created by David and other members of the CS50 teaching staff, all of these sub-points over here. This is not my web page, but I can link to it from my own HTML. It's just something that's a feature given to you by the internet, by Chrome and by HTML and by the existence of the internet, being linked to the internet.
There's a question up there. So paragraph tag breaks a new line. So basically it gives you a line break. Yeah, because the paragraph tag by default has some formatting with it that includes like a break at the end. So you could imagine a web page in which they have a bunch of like p tags instead of having the proper break tag, BR tag. You could probably hack it that way, but
yeah, absolutely. And you would get a lot more. You can get a lot more granular with it when you get to CSS too. You can decide that paragraph tags shouldn't break, for example. You can overwrite that functionality. You can overwrite pretty much any styling that you want with CSS, which is super cool.
Question is, how do you get the videos to play? You mean the staff people like doing like fun things? Those are not videos, actually. Well, they're GIFs, right?
Correct. They were originally videos, and then Dan Coffey very kindly transcoded them and turned them into GIF images, which then got put onto a server somewhere. And we'll get into image tags, but image tags essentially let you embed any image, and GIFs are technically images.
Yep.
And so because they're images, you can put them into your web page just like you would put a regular image, a JPEG or a PNG file, and they'll render, because Chrome knows how to render GIF images.
It'd be interesting if you went to DevTools and checked out how long it takes that page to load.
Oh, sure, the network?
It's a heavy page.
Sure, so let's go ahead and, specifically the staff page?
The staff page,
yeah. The staff page is...
If you've got a fast connection, you might not notice it, but
I mean, if we're still loading stuff, yeah, it's been, how long exactly was that? That was a while. That was
I don't know the size of it.
3 seconds? Oh, 2.97 seconds here at the very bottom. It says finish 2.97 seconds. This is part of the Chrome Developer Tools. This is the network panel, which allows you to analyze network traffic as you're connecting to and from other websites, or asynchronously downloading, fetching information from other websites, which we'll take a look at asynchronous JavaScript in the future, making things like AJAX requests, but that's beyond the scope of today's stream. I'm going to go to menu. I'm going to go over to the staff page. And we can see all the stuff is loading. 2.56 seconds, actually.
Fast connection.
Yeah, I mean, it could be, to be fair, these images are probably cached.
Oh, yeah. So you could do like a hard reload.
Yeah.
How would I do that?
You would
hold
do
like an option or something,
shift
right?
refresh.
Look at that. It's 30 some megabytes. I can't even say it fast enough. It's like, 72.3 megabytes.
Because it wasn't cached,
Yep.
it took 5 seconds in this case, on a fast connection even. And probably not necessarily because that's how fast we can download. We can download much faster than that. But that is, maybe not actually. That's pretty fast. That's actually pretty fast. But we get faster connection here. We can. Harvard's got insane internet. But yeah, that illustrates not only network fetching but caching.
Yes.
So the power of caching. So caching files, caching JavaScript, caching CSS, HTML on your local machine prevents you from having to make more network requests in the future. But that is a little bit beyond the scope of today's talk. But a nice tidbit. Very good to look at that. Definitely consideration for building your websites. You want to minify your assets as much as possible, and this often takes the form of minifying JavaScript, for taking a full JavaScript file and basically shrinking it down, kind of pressurizing it until it's very tiny but still accomplishes the same thing. We can illustrate that in a JavaScript stream in the future. Cool. Hard reload and cap the connection speed in Chrome DevTools for maximum fairness. Yeah, we're not going to do that. I'm going to abuse the internet here as much as I possibly can. Mango Zero says, when should you use a new p tag over a break tag? I'm inclined to actually not use break tags that much. I don't know about you. Do you use break tags a lot?
Yeah, I wouldn't use a p tag if you want to break. I mean, break is a break, right?
Sure.
There is this, I can't think of it right now, like when you want to have like a new, oh geez, what is it? Like this, to put a line in.
Oh, the HR?
Horizontal rule tag.
Yeah.
I'll use that occasionally, but if I want to break, I use a BR tag. But I mean, don't use those if you want like margin or something, like around an element. That's CSS stuff. Like semantically, when you want to like break your text or break two divs or something, that's when a break makes sense.
I see what you mean. So if you're in the middle of a p tag, for example, and you want to space out some stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a break. That's when you use break.
Gotcha.
I mean, that's the great thing about HTML5 is you just follow sort of what the tags mean.
Yep.
If it's a paragraph, it's a paragraph. It's not a line break, it's a paragraph.
I guess it's easier than, for example, wrapping that all in a div, because a div is kind of bulky, and if you're not styling it, then it's not as crucial. Yeah. I would say if you're styling that broken text in a specific way, maybe use a div instead. But I think I can see your point. The break tag is probably better for a lot of use cases. Can you shed some light on what flash cookies are? Flash cookies. So cookies are just files that are stored locally to your machine that preserve some token that you can use to keep logged into a web page. A flash cookie, I'm not actually 100%, okay, so they are used with Flash. So Flash is an old runtime. It's an Adobe product, Adobe Flash. And it was basically the precursor to HTML5 and things like Canvas, which allows you to do graphical stuff. Flash is very closely tied to things like newgrounds.com and a lot of other things where people were posting games and animations and stuff before the internet became as flexible as it is now with JavaScript. You basically had to use a program called Flash, which was an editor, a program kind of like Photoshop that you could sort of draw out an animation or a game in the tool and then export something that you would embed into your HTML page, and then that would load in the web page as sort of a embedded game or animation or whatever, an application. And so a Flash cookie looks like something that is sort of similar to cookies, but used specifically in the realm of Adobe Flash. And Adobe Flash is not used as much. I mean, it started dying as soon as Steve Jobs said we're not going to support Flash. You can still use Flash on Macs and PCs, and you'll see websites that say Adobe Flash wants to be able to have access to this web page or whatever, and it'll say, oh, if you don't have it installed, install the runtime. But it's much more, I think, modern and more relevant to use HTML5 and Canvas and those sorts of things, which are much more well supported.
Especially accessibility even. I mean, that's a big push in HTML5. If you put everything in Flash, you can't see what's in it like we can with, let's say, inspect source.
Sure.
So it's definitely not probably a good idea to be coding right now in Flash.
Yeah, yeah. Flash is a pretty old technology. I would recommend against it, but you will see it. And Flash Cookie looks like it's similar to what cookies are for the web browser, just in the realm of like Flash embedded applications. Which again, to Tom's point, you can't see what's inside of them, so you don't know what you're actually necessarily storing the credentials or information for. Good question. A little bit beyond the scope of certainly HTML, but let me just clear some of these tabs away just so that it's a little bit less filled up. Chrome does use a lot of memory, which is unfortunate. We have now illustrated hypertext, and hypertext is one of the most foundational important things that you can learn when it comes to HTML and building web pages, being able to connect back and forth between someone else's server and your own HTML page. But what if we wanted to, for example, connect to our own page, our own HTML page, another HTML page that we ourselves have written, not to a page that's stored somewhere else on the internet. And we can very easily do that. If I just go over to VS Code, go over here, make a new file, and I'm going to call this tom.html because you're here with me right now.
My hand got cut off. There we go. Yeah.
I'm going to do the same thing that I did earlier. First, I'm going to press Command B to get out of the site inspector, type HTML, go down, hit Tab, get myself a starting point, get rid of my script and style sheet. I'm going to call this Tom's web page. And are you on the staff page? Did you get a picture taken?
Oh, yes.
Oh, did you have a picture taken? Okay.
Oh, I was just zany that day.
Okay. Let's go ahead. This will allow us to get into a few things eventually. But why don't we go ahead and go over to staff. We'll grab Tom's picture here. So it's sorted by first name.
Yes.
Let me go ahead. Oh, there we go. Tom Ballatore.
Ooh.
Let's go ahead and save that image.
Okay.
I'm going to save that GIF. And I'm going to save it here in my streams, web, HTML, and I'm going to call this tom.gif. And it's already going to save it as a GIF file by default because that's the file type, the MIME type rather, of that image, which is another thing we can talk about in the future. But now I have two web pages. I have a page that is what we've written so far with some P tags and an A tag and an HTML body. And in here, I'm going to do a little bit of what we've already done. I'm going to say, my name is Tom Ballatore. That's how you spell your name.
You got it, man.
And then let's illustrate a new tag just for fun. So image source equals tom.gif. And the nice thing about VS Code is it knows what files are actually in your, because right here when we added it to our directory, VS Code imported it into its settings so it knows that it exists. So it actually has a reference to it before we even typed it one time, which is super cool. And I'm just going to do that. And I think I might need the slash. I don't know 100% if I do or not. This is an interesting example of a self-closing tag. So a tag that we don't, for example, need to do this for. This. We don't need to do that with image tags.
Can you actually close it? I know you can close it with the thing inside the first tag, like it's like you should put a forward slash.
Yeah, a slash there.
Can you actually close an image tag with that?
I don't know.
I don't think you can.
It might just parse over it honestly and not do anything.
Because I mean, it doesn't make sense. Like the image is either there or it's not, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a. Once again, another tag that has an attribute. So, and this is something you see when you're referencing assets typically, for example, links that link to other style sheets, scripts that link to JavaScript files. In this case, we have an image that's linking. It needs to know what the image is, right? We need to say this is going to be where an image is in our file, in our HTML document. But more importantly, we need to know what that image is. We need a link to it, right? So that's settled. So we have a web page somewhere. And actually, if I go over to my folder where I have tom.html and I double click tom.html, look, my name is Tom Ballatore, and this is an excellent web page. So you see, it's very easy to make a personal web page these days. You just need an H1 and an image, right? And actually, it's actually kind of cool. I kind of like this. It's a kind of a meme web page.
That's my favorite Radiohead shirt. I'm a big Radiohead fan. I don't know if you like them. But.
I haven't listened to them too much, to be honest.
The stream is over.
They were in, I think, a Guitar Hero game.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
One of their songs. Super cool.
Yes. Okay, cool. Well, there's some questions here.
JockDS says you can specify the image width directly in HTML. That's correct. You can do that, but it's not typically looked well upon. You want to typically keep all of your styling separate from your HTML. Those tags that you're referring to are like HTML4 tags that are kind of deprecated and not really modern and encouraged to be used. So I would refrain from doing any of that sort of thing. If you're doing a quick and dirty web page where you just want to test something, totally fine. But for a production web page, CSS is where you want to keep all your styling stuff. Yeah,
And
exactly. Better way to do it is in CSS. That's correct, 100%.
And everyone's aware of how they would add like that information into the HTML by adding either a class or an ID. Perhaps we'll get to that later.
We aren't going to cover...
Or the CSS stream.
We're not going to cover... Yeah, that's
Okay.
going to be in the CSS stream. That'll be the first thing we talk about, actually. Cool. One of the first things, IDs and classes.
Awesome.
But yeah. So we have our 2 web pages, but now let's say I want to actually link to Tom's web page. Well, it's not much more difficult. Actually, it's not any more difficult than what we did before with cs50.harvard.edu. If we just say tom.html right here in our A tag and already in our home page, by default, if we don't specify HTTP or HTTPS, it's going to assume the file protocol. So it knows to look for tom.html relative to where this HTML file is, which is in the same folder. So therefore, we don't need to specify a subfolder or any of that sort of thing. Boorock and JL97, thank you very much for the follow. I apologize if I missed Boorock, I'm not 100%. I know I got Mango 0, but thanks again. Let's go and refresh this. Oh, actually, sorry. I have to revise my text here. Tom is awesome. Oh. Refresh that. Tom is awesome. And he's so awesome we've already visited his webpage. And if we click that link, you can indeed see instantaneously our browser using the file protocol up at the top left loaded our tom.html.
Fully loaded.
So you can load not only links to other people's servers and just web pages that exist on the internet, but files that are local to your own file system.
Cool.
Let me make sure. I apologize. I haven't been keeping up tremendously with the chat. Let me go ahead and just make sure. Macromedia Flash old school is OMG busted. Yeah, that was before they turned it into Adobe Flash. Is there any benefit of using standalone tags? If not, why do they exist? Standalone tags. Let me first of all define what that means. Standalone tags in HTML, probably in HTML, yes. Empty tags, a few tags that do not have end tags because they are used to place standalone elements in the document or on the page. The reason that they are given, that they're standalone elements is because there is no data between the start of an image and the end of the image. The image is already defined to be within its source attribute. The attribute contains all the information you need about the image. We're not going to say, this is where an image exists and also here's some text. That doesn't make any sense. And you can think of certain situations in which maybe you want like a text overlay, but you would do that with CSS and a separate tag, or make your own custom tag. But for the purposes of just raw HTML, which has no styling, there's no semantic meaning of HTML or of an image that also contains within it text. Like that doesn't mean anything to HTML. So that's why you would see standalone tags, something that just exists as it is and doesn't need really any more information, so to speak. But good question. Yep, the network tab somebody mentioned earlier. Why would you want to close an image tag? You just have to close it in order to, I guess, tell. I guess no, you don't need to. You don't need to.
Yeah, you were just showing that. I was asking about that, and it sort of stayed in there.
You don't need the slash here either, do you? I think it's completely optional. If I'm not.
It's optional, apparently. Yeah.
Yeah, it is optional. Yeah. Although it looked like oh no, you shipped it because your animation was moving. But yeah, no, you just end it. You don't need a slash image tag because there's not there's not going to be anything between the image where it's defined and something else like there would be with a p tag. We're not saying here's an image, here's some text data, here's the rest of the image, or here's the end of the image. That doesn't exist. That meaning does not exist. How do you make GIF files, says JL97? Usually using, there's a lot of ways you can do it. Dan probably used what's called FFmpeg, which is a binary that you can download, which allows you to encode video and audio and images in a lot of different ways. You can also use ImageMagick to make GIF images. You can use Photoshop, you can use GIMP, you can use a lot of other programs. Dan probably used FFmpeg in this case, taking a video file and then just basically saying FFmpeg video file something.gif. And that's probably how he did it, with some settings to specify the resolution and whatnot. Aren't GIFs typically larger than MP4s? Why not loop an MP4 and hide the vid controls using HTML attributes? GIFs typically larger than MP4s? I'm not sure if that's accurate. An MP4,
Depends on the settings, right?
Yeah, I would have to see the settings. I would be inclined to say that they're probably cheaper in terms of disk space than MP4s, especially because MP4s usually have associated audio. But I mean, you could delete the audio channel of an MP4. But
good question.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'd have to do a cross comparison between an MP4 and the equivalent GIF. We've also really heavily compressed these GIF images, so they're very light.
And the frame rate is probably a lot slower.
It is. You could make the same thing for the MP4. You could change the MP4's frame rate. But good question. I'm not convinced that MP4s are necessarily cheaper in terms of hard drive consumption, but we'd have to test it. Photoshop Premiere, probably you can make GIFs with some simple programs as well. You don't need slash. I mean, I never used a slash. Probably you can if you want. GIF size is lower than MP4 because no audio and quality, says Meowcat.
Okay.
Cool. So we've done some of the most important stuff now so far. Now, let's go ahead and look and see what else we have left. We did cover block level versus inline elements, and I have a couple of more elements in which we can actually showcase this difference. Let's go ahead and go to our HTML page here. Our index.html, get rid of this welcome thing, get rid of tom.html for now.
That's fine.
And then index.html. So, it would be a fun way to illustrate this. Now, there are two important tags that we can use to kind of show this sort of block level versus inline level concept, which we've already illustrated with some elements that are intrinsically block level versus intrinsically inline. A tags are, I believe, A tags are block level. I think. Is that 100? No, I'm not actually sure.
No, you can put them in line or text.
I think they're inline. So in this case, I could say, Tom is really awesome. And then, good? Everything good? Let's wait for the chat. Who spilled the coffee? Did you, Cresta?
Can you see us now?
Test, test, test. Everybody, let us know. Tom is too awesome, so the internet broke.
Damn.
Yeah.
Oh, you can see us. Okay, there.
Cool. Everything's back. So apologies for that. We have a server that's cross-streaming, and it crashed, but everything is back up and running. So we were illustrating before the stream broke that we have two A tags here. Before, we just kind of added them together immediately without this BR, and they were just kind of like directly touching each other. Like it just went, Tom is awesome, and then immediately, without any spaces or anything, it said Tom is really awesome. But we wanted those to be on two separate lines, and it doesn't suffice to just do this because, again, HTML is not the same thing as what you're typing in the text editor. In this case, there was a space, there was a tab, so there was a space there. But if I do this, or I just do an enter like that, you can see there's not a new line. It doesn't add a new line to our HTML, even though, I mean, I'm typing a new line in my text editor, so you would think, you know, the two should be separated. The styling is separate from what your text actually looks like here. It's really just the elements themselves that mandate how things are styled, right? Yes. So there was one way to do it, which was the BR tag, and there's another way to do it using a couple of different tags, well, one tag specifically, and this is a tag that's really, really important that you're going to want to really pay attention to, and that is the div tag. So the div tag is essentially just used to contain other things. It's a container tag. But the nice thing about the div tag is that it's a block level tag, meaning that whatever you put inside of a div is going to go down to the next line as soon as it's finished, right? So I can type in this code here, div, and I'm just going to go ahead and copy this line here, the Tom is awesome tag. I'm going to paste it just right in there inside that div, refresh the page, and as you can see, Tom is awesome is now on a separate line from Tom is really awesome.
Sweet. And the implication here is that somehow, I mean, the div just has the styling with it. You probably could hack like the P tag or the A tag there, give it an ID perhaps that has some characteristic where you could get a break after it in CSS.
Absolutely.
But obviously this is the easiest way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. There's so much you can do with CSS. There's so many different ways you can do the same thing in CSS. With raw HTML, your options are a little more limited, but you do have to take into consideration different ways of doing it. Much more stupid way to do it is a P tag with styles white space pre-line. Yeah, and again, using attribute styles, probably something I would suggest not doing for a production application, but certainly a great way to easily bootstrap something and test it really fast. If you want to test like some styles working without creating a new separate CSS file and doing all that business, much easier to actually just use an inline style. But again, not recommended for modularity. Essentially, it comes down to modularity. Keep your HTML, keep the skeleton away from the skin, keep your HTML away from the CSS.
So I'm going to thank JAL97 for the follow and also for the comment. Yeah, I'm getting a little tired of the Tom is awesome. So let's move on to Colton. Let's move on to who is awesome here.
Colton, H1 Privet, and Biklarbik as well. Thank you very much for the follows.
All right. Yeah.
So yeah, divs, great way to contain stuff. You can put anything you want inside of a div. I could put a series of A tags if I wanted to. And now notice if I were to, for example, duplicate this several times, even though I have 3 elements, 3 Tom is awesome inside of this this div tag, it's only after the div has finished closing that we actually get this new line break down to the Tom is really awesome. So this illustrates what the div is. It doesn't apply to everything inside of the div. It only applies to the div's contents as a whole. That's what becomes block level. And so you can envision, for example, styling this div to be a certain background color, and then maybe this becomes sort of a block or an article or some other semantically meaningful part of your web page that you want to be on its own area and then to have content following it on a new line. So.
I'm from an Italian family in Chicago that owned a pizzeria. So this question about does Tom like pineapple pizza? No.
Yeah, Tom
I don't like pineapples. Don't even ask me that again, all right?
This is a source of, must be a major source of contention for
I love pineapple and I love pizza, but
you and Dan Coffey would not get along too well, then I have to take it because he's a very big pineapple pizza.
Dan's a great guy. I won't hold that against him. But
yeah, a little bit. Just a little bit. I actually don't know. I think I remain neutral. Because I think I've had pineapple pizza that tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
But I don't think I
There's so many other options with pizza. Why would you default to the pineapple?
I don't think I crave it. But I think if it's in front of me, I'll eat it. So if it's in front of you, you won't eat it? If you're hungry?
Oh, if I'm really hungry and it's all I have, yeah, I'll eat it. Sure.
Okay. So you don't
after taking the pineapples off.
you don't find it disgusting. Pineapple and ham, says Brenda, yes.
Dan is awesome, yeah.
I must say that I am surprised that MP4 is smaller than GIF. Yeah, I mean, it's a video file versus sort of a compressed image file, right? There's just usually less information, fewer frames. But I can see a particular encoding of an MP4, in which case maybe it would get smaller than a GIF if the right settings were applied to it.
I think we need to look into like this because the settings might be default for different things and it might look smaller or something. We should probably test that out and see.
Yeah,
but
and I mean, I have to imagine MP4s also have a lot more metadata associated with them.
Yeah, I have that feeling, but.
Yeah. But I'm not sure. Maybe not. Maybe not. Generally, it's the case that an MP4 will be smaller than a GIF, or a GIF will be smaller than an MP4.
This question about the lossless images in HTML. Yeah, you could use a TIFF image.
Can you use any lossless image formats? I have to imagine. Yeah, like a PNG. Yeah, lossless. PNGs are lossless.
SVG, which is a vector thing that you can just totally expand.
It's SVGs are really cool. That's actually a separate element. There's an SVG element that allows you to embed SVG information, and we can maybe even do a separate. We're going to do an advanced HTML stream, which has a lot more stuff than what we're covering today. And in that stream, I think we'll do like SVG and some other cool stuff. But yeah, that's really cool. We do. I think even CS50 uses SVG for like our video player. We have like some of the icons are SVGs. Super cool. JP guy. Oh yeah, the JP guy's not here. Typically they have pizza discussions. There's a guy named JP guy, and he and Nwanda3333, whose name is Ashley, they have a conversation. Okay. I think he and Ashley and Bavik, they all have a conversation. Anyway, cool. That is what a div is. Now, another one that I want to talk about, another element that's actually the opposite of div, of what a div is. It's an element that is inline. It allows us to contain something that's inline. Are you letting him know what it is? Okay. You can see my outline, to be fair.
My eyes are not good enough for that.
You can use, yeah.
Are you gonna span?
We're gonna span.
Span is cool. I love span.
So this is actually gonna be kind of underwhelming because we're not going into styling. A span is typically where you would use styling to make it clear that that's what you're doing with the span, right?
It would allow you to grab a section of something with your styling.
Exactly. Exactly. So I can say span, and I'm not even gonna grab just one word. I'm actually gonna grab this whole sentence and then close my span tag there. And a span is the opposite of a div in that rather than making whatever its content is block level, it just makes it inline, but it contains it. So we can say, I want to make all spans red color, and normally that would be impossible to do with just some subset of text within a paragraph, for example. Mm-hmm. So we have to have some way to associate some metadata with specific blocks of text. Yep. And if as you're watching, this is kind of similar to what we talked about, where you associate metadata with a particular word or a particular set of words in a game, and this is something that she and I talked about on Facebook. But you would do this with, you wouldn't probably use a span, you would use an ID or a class, but the idea is the exact same. Mark some sort of group of text, with some particular metadata that allows you to use JavaScript or CSS to target it and change its functionality. So that's how I see spans, and that's how they're typically used. Spans and divs kind of go hand in hand as sort of being apples and oranges, but sort of like the same two ideas kind of at opposite ends, really. They kind of go in tandem.
And Jay, yeah, forms are on Colton's list, so I don't know if we're going to get there or not.
Oh yeah, we are going to get there. We have another hour, actually, over an hour, and we'll try to go a little bit faster. We have, next thing we're going to get into, and I hope, hopefully, do you have time? Do you have another hour, or are you going to have to dive?
I'm cool.
Okay, you're going to cool. Okay. I enjoy this. I enjoy this back and forth.
I enjoy this too. This is like I've never been like on anything live. Sections.
Yeah, you do very well live. You're doing very.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, this is great.
I have a face for radio, they say.
Oh yeah. A voice for radio too. And you I heard that you typically teach your sections like this. You teach video section.
I do a video section. I do an online section for CS50 and the other courses in the stable. And I have a DSLR set up and stuff. I have like bookshelf behind me and stuff, trying to bring a little
class?
A little class, a little gravatas. What's the word?
Sure,
yes,
gravitas.
Gravitas.
Yeah.
Yes. But yeah, definitely. It's fun doing this.
Yeah.
But you have I'm looking at this, thinking about the setup, like the video setup. I got to talk to Dan or you or whoever made this because you use an OBS for the stream.
OBS, Streamlabs OBS. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm using another thing that I drop a lot of frames and it's just not as good as this. So this is cool. No, I use. Well, it's here, but Camera Live and Cam Twist.
Oh, yeah. Streamlabs OBS. I mean, I think Streamlabs OBS might be Mac specific, or no, it's not. I don't think it's PC specific, but regular OBS, which is the same backend, is the program that you can download for Mac or PC.
Okay.
So look into OBS, Open Broadcast Software.
I will do it.
All right, so, and people have some very flattering comments. You guys have a good back and forth. Fun fact, Forth is a programming language. Yep, that's true. OBS is the best, isn't it? Says Jack, OTTS. I'm reluctant to say it's the best, but it's certainly one of the more popularly adopted. Banter between Asley and Jan are awesome. Asley's birthday is next Friday.
Happy birthday.
We have to have a happy... We're going to be on stream next Friday, so we'll wish Asley happy birthday. All right.
Yes.
Let's get into something that will allow us to structure our data a little bit more, I guess, semantically useful. Rahul Ranjan, thank you very much for the follow. And Superfast Jellyfish, thank you very much for the follow. I like that username, Superfast Jellyfish.
Lists.
So yeah, we're going to be talking about how to put information in a list. So for example, if I want to create an application or a web app that's my grocery list or a to-do list or something, right? It's a very important thing. Lists are something that we use a lot when we're trying to lay out information in web pages. Even the most basic of HTML documents that aren't styled, research papers are going to have things like a table of contents, for example, or even a sub-table of contents for an article or a section. So let's go ahead and illustrate a simple list. I'm actually going to get rid of all this lorem ipsum text. We're going to keep the Tom is really awesome at the very top of the page, but I'm going to show everybody the ways in which Tom is awesome. I'm going to enumerate over them in a list. And we're going to first use an unordered list because we're not going to sort these by priority.
It's hard to order my awesomeness.
Yeah, we can.
My wife is probably tuning in, laughing at this.
She's going to be laughing. Yeah. She's going to subscribe and provide her own suggestions. But this is how we begin using a list. And so this is going to be using some embedded tags. So like we saw earlier, and I'm not sure if I emphasized this well enough, we actually put within a div a tag, right? We had some tag within a tag and its closing tag, this a tag and its closing tag within this starting tag and this closing tag. So you can nest, this is called nesting, putting something inside of something else in the context of programming, HTML, but it applies to any programming language really, any markup or programming language. Some people are going to say HTML is not a programming language, but inside of this div, we've put another completely separate tag, and we could do even more than that. We could say, for example, image, and I could say source is equal to tom.html here, right? And
that's going to be tom.gif.
Oh, sorry, tom.gif. Thank you very much for that. I could do this, and I could refresh the page. And this is pretty cool because we have an image, right? And we have a reenactment in real time, actually. But if I click this image, notice that it takes us to the web page. So we've actually gotten brand new behavior, which we haven't really enumerated. just by putting some tag inside of another tag. So these puzzle pieces are very interchangeable, and they work together in very interesting ways. I'm going to come back here, just back to our index. I'm going to, we'll keep the image there, but I'm going to betray my own prior sort of recommendation, and I'm going to say the width should be only 50 pixels. Is that going to be too small?
It's cool.
That's a good size. 100 pixels. And so this is another attribute that you can add to an image, which will allow you to specify the size of that image, and it will go no larger than that image. Svia Dio, thank you very much for the follow.
And super fast jellyfish and Rahu Rajan.
Oh yeah. As I was pointing out before, nice as Jack OTS. I like this tutorial. It makes me feel like a pro since I already know HTML, says Sparky. Awesome. Well, tune in for the CSS and JavaScript ones too, because those are going to be very fun. This is going to be a very nice way, I think, to bootstrap us up to some really cool, juicy content. Everyone needs a colleague like Colton.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Pamper me, colleague. Looks like a model photo shoot. I'm talking about you.
Where?
Colton is just amazing, says Patrick Machado. Thank you very much, Patrick. I very much appreciate that. Do you have to specify the size of the image in CSS, or do you need it to do it in the HTML? Either way. You can do it in either way. But my recommendation is to not do it like this, because this is sort of tying in styling information with the semantic content of your actual program. You don't want to do that. You want to keep your styling, you want to keep your skin away from the skeleton, so to speak. The body should be the HTML and actually have the styling, what it looks like, separate, so that somebody who's a designer, for example, who's just concerned with how things look, doesn't have to worry about how things are laid out, right? Because they can get kind of
and like the JavaScript's like the muscles moving.
Yeah,
that's like really nasty, but like it really makes sense.
Actually, that's a great way to sort of fill that analogy. The JavaScript being the muscles, the verbs. If you were to do noun, adjective, and this isn't my own analogy, but the skeleton, the nouns, verbs, and adjectives being the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Right?
So somebody really done the skeleton skin muscle thing?
No, that's closer to something that you actually. Okay, I've heard of skeletons and skin, but you came up with muscles. Okay. I've never heard muscles.
It was said here, first time ever. All right.
You want to keep the skin away from the skeleton. That's going in the notebook. And that's going to be clipped.
By the way, one little thing: when you do the CSS thing, you'll be seeing that probably pixels might not be the best choice. Because if you're on mobile device and you're shrinking your screen and it might be very small, you're probably going with relative elements or something, or other measures.
We'll get into that. We'll get into EM and all sorts of things with relative scaling on the CSS stream. For now, we're probably going to stick with pixels just because it's easier to explain and to illustrate without going into too much of the CSS stuff. But just the takeaway should be, don't do this, but this is sort of something that you will see sometimes, and it's a great way to test something, but make sure to take it out in the end. Before you actually ship something, put it into a, this is more of a do as I say, not as I do, because I've done this in production applications, but you want to keep this in a CSS file separate so that you as a designer or your own designer somewhere else has access to it without affecting your the semantic meaning of your web page.
And for Sunlight as a question, what are you referring to? I think you're talking about like the skin and the skeleton thing. Basically, skeleton being the HTML, the sort of structure.
Analogize the web page as being a human or some creature, some biological creature, a mammal, whatnot. You would visualize the HTML sort of as being the skeleton, it's the structure that makes up the web page. It doesn't define what it looks like, though, necessarily. Skeletons all kind of look the same. So the skin, or sort of the outward appearance, would be the CSS, the styling that actually applies to the creature.
Later on, if we have time, we got to do a CSS garden or a Zen garden. If you've ever shown them that,
I've seen that. So, it's amazing, website.
Okay.
And then the muscles, the things that actually allow that creature to move its skeleton and do things, the JavaScript. That's sort of where that analogy comes from, and that is that's the origin of that. That's the origin of that analogy. I use VW and RAM too, says Jacob Chasen. This is definitely the right way to do it for a lot of applications that need to be sort of very reactive and what's it called? Responsive.
Yeah, responsive.
Not reactive. Reactive is different. Some people still stick to pixels because it's the easiest. Yep, that's what I'm doing here. That's the easiest. So let's get into ULs, so unordered lists. So all the reasons that Tom is awesome, and I want to query the chat if the chat can provide me with what they think are some of the reasons that that Tom is awesome. We'll put them in here in our unordered list and illustrate how an unordered list works. Patrick, thank you very much for the follow. Patrick Machado.
He has not picked his nose yet.
That's a good one.
I haven't. I scratched it kind of.
Oh, you have a PhD. Hey,
I do have a PhD.
That's a pretty cool one.
I do.
First of all, let's add an H element in here, and let's just say, why is Tom awesome? Right? I mean, we should say why is, what are because there's so many reasons you are. What are the reasons Tom is not awesome?
And maybe the number one is I didn't pay very much for the person to write my PhD for me.
Oh, okay.
It was really
Nice.
cheap, so that was really smart of me. Nah, just joking.
So he has a PhD, right?
Cool.
He has a PhD. And now notice that I'm using a couple different elements here, HTML tags, elements, kind of the same meaning. I have a UL, and that just means an unordered list, and what that's going to translate to is these bullets that we're going to see very shortly don't have a numbering system to them. There's no order to them. They're just there. They exist. Arbitrary order. No weight, therefore, given to any one over another. Let's see. Am I missing the chat? Let me make sure.
No, it's there. They're just talking about this. It seems like everybody knows about CS50, but the chat, the stream has been going on. Like this is the 24th one.
They said you worked at a pizzeria. Is that accurate, or did you say your family owned a pizzeria?
No, my father owned it, and I worked there. And my father's best memory of me was when I was away at University of Illinois, engineering guy, supposed to be sort of have an attitude. I actually like clean feces off the floor.
Ooh, man.
And he's like, "That's my boy." So
we're about to get taken off of Twitch for.
Sorry. Oh, I didn't say that.
No, that's totally fine.
So,
that's not against it.
So yes, I did work at a pizzeria. Yes.
That's pretty brutal. I don't know if I want to do that. I'm not a huge fan of that kind of labor.
No, well, that's why I would prefer to be sitting in front of this now doing this. Yes, but you got to respect those sorts of jobs.
Computer. Oh yeah, absolutely. Somebody has to do it. And if nobody wants to do it, then we're kind of SOL.
So beard. The beard I had shaved a couple months ago because I'm starting to look. I look much older when I have a beard. And
you want to look older?
Okay, this is like I'm coming for this CS50 for lawyers class, so I really want to have a little bit more heft, So I did grow the beard back.
Interesting. I see. I respect that.
On Tuesday, I'm definitely gonna be shaving because.
Yeah, I would say you said you're 48, but I would say you probably look like you're 33.
Yeah, I feel about 35.
Yeah.
And that's really the secret. There was a recent study since some nature science, the age you feel is really probably your actual age.
Right. And you probably have to imagine you're probably not a heavy smoker. I know that pre-age.
No, I don't smoke. I have asthma, so I do not smoke.
Smoking is a large thing across Japan, though, is it not?
Not that much anymore.
Not anymore, is it? But it was.
It was, and it was awful.
Is it still a big problem in China?
China, yeah. It's every time I've been to China, it's usually smoking.
Okay. Yeah, smoking. I know that's a premature aging sort of recipe.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I have to look into obviously the data, but I think that based on what I understand, the data does point towards things like that, and obviously a huge risk factor for.
I am 48. I am 48, and I'll tell you one thing you might not know about me. I have a 17.
People are in disbelief that you're 48.
Well, I have a 17, 14, and 12-year-old. No, I'm 48. Yeah, 48. September 27th, 1970. Oh, you're 43. Ah, gotcha, cool. But no, I do have virtually 3 teenagers in my house. So the fact that my wife and I are on our 20th year together this year.
Congratulations,
Thank
by the
you.
way.
We've made it through 3 teenagers. So I'm kind of not a great guy all the time, but I must be okay in that regard. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
you're taking care of yourself. So kudos. Like I said, 33. I strive to look as young as you when I'm 48.
Sweet.
That would be a dream of mine. Because you grow the beard to look older, but you really, really don't look 48, says Ashley. Yeah.
Okay, I put the glasses on. Okay. What do we have here? Yeah.
German.
Okay, yes. Anyway.
Germans wear glasses.
Why did I do the German accent? I have no idea. Anyway.
Complication related with CS50 joke, and he definitely does not look 48. I'll say that. We'll kind of distill all of the comments that people have posted into the chat there. But this is an unordered list. And it's founded on sort of a nice entertaining premise, but it illustrates a very sort of important aspect of HTML. So why is Tom awesome? So let's go ahead and get rid of the developer tools. We have an H1, of course, just so that we bring our attention to the list below it. And we can see that this fact that we've declared a UL has done a couple of things for us. The UL itself is indented, or it might be the style that's applied per element within the UL, actually. But the UL is, as a whole, indented, and each element within the UL is given its own line, and it's a block level. I believe ULs are block level elements. So if we were to say, for example, immediately after that, href equals, I'll just say something, and then Tom, and then refresh it, it does indeed get put down below the end of the list. So the UL itself and OLs are block level. They put a space between the and the prior and ending content. Gesundheit, by the way.
Thank
to
you.
tie in well with the German.
Yeah.
German reference.
Domo, arigatou.
But this is how you do ULs, unordered list. And just by simply changing the UL to an OL, as I do here.
Interesting. How do you put the list to the right of the image?
The list to the right of the image. So that would
You're
be...
looking on a screen that might be collapsed or larger? How is it?
How do you do that without CSS?
Oh, you want to put it to the right of the image.
You would have to disable the block level styling of the image, and we can maybe do that with an attribute. But
and float, that would be another way.
Float as well. That's all CSS stuff, so it's a little bit, it's not really in the realm of HTML, so we won't cover it, but we will cover a lot of that sort of stuff, doing a lot of really cool stuff in CSS next week.
And that's exactly what floats are for, like wrapping text around images like that. Don't use floats for layout, okay? It's a hack.
Yeah.
You've got other tools, but definitely that exactly is what it's for.
Yeah.
The question, why is, they say HTML is not a language. Of course it's a language, it's not a scripting language.
Yeah, it's not a programming language, it's not a scripting language, it's a markup language. Its goal is to define the layout of some document, of some information, and then be interpreted and rendered in a specific way by a processor. And it differs from a programming language in that you can't actually perform logic within HTML. There's no structure to actually do like if statements and looping and anything like that. So you can't get programming functionality with HTML, but you can get sort of layout functionality, and that's sort of that's the difference. People will split hairs. It is a language, but it is not necessarily a programming language. You cannot actually you can't program and create programs. You can only create documents with it effectively. All right, cool. By just changing a simple tag from UL to OL, we got the little dots. Notice that these were dots before. The 1, 2, 3, 4, they are now numbered. They are now from sequential order, and based on at least the logic of this list, we would assume that it's most important that you have a PhD. It's kind of important that you worked at a pizzeria, but not as important as the fact that you have a PhD, and so on and so forth. And the fact that you definitely don't have 48 is the least important of all of those.
I'm looking at this thinking, do you know this Abraham Lincoln Gettysburg Address PowerPoint? Google it.
Sure.
So it's
Gettysburg Address PowerPoint?
Yeah, Edward Tufte, this visualization guy, came up with Gettysburg Address, if you're not familiar with this, is one of the most famous speeches in American history. Abraham Lincoln on a battlefield gives this let's not give up on this country and freedom sort of speech, right? But if he had PowerPoint, he would have come up with these cheesy lists. If you know the Gettysburg Address, it's poetic, it's inspirational, and it's just incredible oratory.
I'll have to admit that I don't remember. I've read it. I don't remember it offhand, so a lot of this stuff probably won't.
407 years ago.
Sure.
Our forefathers brought forth on this continent a nation conceived in liberty, blah, blah, blah. But when you put in bullets, it's like, it just sucks. Yeah, sorry. Did I say that?
Consecrate.
It's not so good, yeah. So, anyway.
Makes the nation unique.
But yeah.
Interesting. I see. I can definitely see the point. Yeah, everything's distilled down into like the bare sort of intrinsic meaning of the statements and not the poetry of it.
And HTML allows you to do that because lists are important.
Yeah, lists are very important, I would say. To-do lists are a common first application. We might even write a to-do list application at some point in the future. Once we get into like JavaScript and CSS, so that we can make it look nice, so that we can check boxes and have the list items sort of disappear. But this is how you get at least the foundation of that idea, the idea of a list written in HTML and displayed to the user. So that's cool. So that's ULs, that's LIs, and OLs. And if I didn't elaborate terribly on LIs, that's just short for a list element. So every single thing that you have within a list needs to be a list element. Now, if I were to say, what's the most important possible thing? Oh, Sludgebeard, thank you very much. I love that name, Sludgebeard. Thank you very much for the follow. Blah, 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 blah. Something that's, another thing that we can say is super cool about Tom, right? Maybe Tom, we haven't even considered the fact that you speak Japanese, right? And that's pretty,
I do, yeah.
That's pretty important. That's pretty cool.
I do.
Some people will like that. But notice that when we passed it into the UL, it does get indented, or the OL in this case. It does get indented, but it hasn't been given a number. It hasn't been given a weight, right? So the parser has sort of said, because it's within the OL, it is indented, right? The indentation is specific to the OL, not to the list elements. But it's not a list element, so it doesn't get a number. It doesn't get a tag. It's just kind of text that's there that gets indented, right? And so that's kind of why you need to be careful about where you actually have your elements, your tags, your closing and ending tags, and what information you put inside of another tag, right? In this case, you might instinctively think to say something like, Tom is awesome, and Tom is awesome, and have those all be sort of bullet points. You're saying, oh, it's within an ordered list, right? It should just work. But no, and actually they don't get sent down to the next line. They're not block level. These are inline elements. Well, rather, this is inline text because it's not within an element. When you use an li, LIs are block level elements. They actually do get set to the next line. So there's a lot of these little details that are easy to, I think, catch you up if you're not super familiar with this landscape. But as soon as you sort of look at it and understand what you're trying to do, if you understand that an OL and an LI needs to exist within an OL and a UL need to have LIs within them, and that's sort of the content declaration, then that's.
Yep. I think you said list element, and they are elements, but it's actually a list item is what people are saying.
List item.
But I mean, it is an element.
I apologize.
Yes.
I apologize. List
Yes.
list item. That was a misspeak of mine. List item. Yep. TJ Henzo and nested lists. You
Sure.
could do nested list. Why not? We'll actually demonstrate that in a second here. Let me just make sure I caught up with the chat. It just got clear now. Thank you all. Had to memorize it in 4th grade, says Brenda. She's referring to the Gettysburg Address.
Yeah.
Colton, 1987, nice haircut, man. How old are you? Thank you very much. Well, for referring to me, I'm assuming because my hair is probably more exaggerated.
Yes.
I am 27, and you are, as we talked on the stream, 48. But people probably think you and I look about the same age, to be fair. If you were shaved, especially.
You have the proper pompadour, man. I love the hair. I love the hair. I wish I had. I'm losing. It's gradually going up and up and up, but
I don't know, man.
Not too much yet, but every year.
I would say
every year. I used to have hair like down to here, but then it's like coming up and up.
Hairline went up a little bit.
It's going up.
DigiCrest says I'm learning Japanese very, very slowly.
Hang in there. I mean, it's. I don't know what your native language is, but if it's English like mine, it's totally different than English, which makes it fun.
Yeah, it's super. Yeah, very different. But that's why I like it a lot. I think
that's why I like it.
I'm more entranced by Japanese than I am by Spanish and German, although I like Spanish and German a lot, and as other languages. Yeah. But Japanese as a mental exercise, to me, it just seems so exciting, and like recognizing kanji after a while and knowing how to read kana. Learning how to read katakana was actually very difficult for a while.
Oh yeah.
Because it's just everything looks so similar. And I'm sorry, I apologize going on this sort of a side note about Japanese, but if you're interested in learning foreign languages, I advocate for, and I think Tom would advocate for, learning something so different from English like Japanese. Yep. But learning any language is honestly great. It's honestly terrific. It's super hard to read that because it's so small.
Nihongo
This looks like
benkyu
suru, yeah.
Sugoku yukkuri. Cool.
Going slow. That means going slowly, right? Sugoku.
I'm going real slow. Yeah. Cool. Awesome.
Is the Japanese school, says Brenda. Oh, that's pretty cool. Actually, I do know that it is popular for Japanese to go to New Zealand.
Yes.
It is a very popular thing, so that makes sense because there's going to be Japanese tourists in New Zealand for them to do so. In California, there's no Japanese in school anywhere. It's like such a very niche thing, just because I don't think there are very many. I guess there probably are Japanese tourists and immigrants that come to California, but probably not to the degree that they come to New Zealand, places like New Zealand and Hawaii and things like that, right?
Yeah. No, it's funny because like when I was like getting into Japan, and that was like when they had their bubble, like early '90s, and it's like kind of like China now, where China's seen as a language you get taught in schools and stuff. But hey, I mean, just learn a foreign language if you don't speak one. And most of you who are attending here probably do speak more than one language, unlike many of my patriots.
I think it's becoming increasingly common. I think people are.
It's great.
Yeah, we're all sort of getting more interconnected, which is pretty cool.
Sweet. All right.
I look old as hell. I definitely don't look like a 43-year-old child. This is 18 by Barbara. I don't know if that's a stab or if that's a. Is he saying you look like a child?
No, they're talking about themselves.
So. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Every time you say no to you.
Saying 43 though. Yeah.
Every time you say no to you, woman, a man's hair
probably
moves
shouldn't read that one.
1 centimeter. Oh, I'm not. Yeah, I probably shouldn't have read that one. This has been a great tangent. It's not terrible. Yeah. Probably a truth. Only Japanese I know from anime. Says Babbitt. Anime is great. Anime is great. It's a little bit hard because Japanese anime is a little bit different than like what you would see conversational Japanese a lot of the time. It's very exaggerated.
Oh yeah, like all the kids who like studied anime, like in my Japanese class, they called themselves like ore, which is like sort of like me.
Yeah.
You know, and like you're not gonna be saying that normally, but you immediately spot them. So,
How many people say sesha?
Sesha. As a joke, we say it.
Oh, do you really?
It's like some like dude samurai thing. Anyway.
Degozaru?
Degozarimasu. Tate matsuri mairimasu. Hi. All right. So that was a tangent.
That was a cool tangent. You know, at the end of the day, learn a language. So we did lists. We were going to do a nested list, actually. Why don't we do that? So we have an ordered list, and I'm just going to, just for the sake of demonstration, I'm actually going to, he knows the following languages, right?
Yes.
And notice that I'm doing a couple of things. So I have an li. So this nested list, if we want a list inside of a list, it needs to go in an li, because that's part of the list, right? An ordered list. So this is going to be number 1, right? This list, and there's going to be the text, he knows the following languages. And we're not going to assign these any particular order, but notice that I have the text within the li, which is separate from the ul. And then within the ul, I'm going to do just what we did earlier with li's, list items, not list elements, as I unfortunately erred earlier. I'm going to say English, because I'm assuming that was your first language. Second one, we'll say Japanese. Well, actually, to be fair, I think German was your second language, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, right. No.
But it was the second language you studied, right?
Yeah, but I mean, yeah.
You know enough German to be dangerous.
Yeah.
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 To be very dangerous to yourself. So we have English, German, and Japanese.
I do. I only know bad words. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay.
How to get a job in USA from Russia knowing only HTML and CSS, says Paulton. Probably not going to get a job in the US from Russia knowing only HTML and CSS. I think you need to know at least JavaScript to be competitive in the web scene. As a designer, I will say if you have incredible CSS design abilities, so you can make absolutely the most beautiful web pages, maybe you can do that. Maybe you can get a company to sponsor you. And I don't know the laws offhand. I don't know how it works. But generally, to be competitive in the web scene, I would say HTML and CSS is nowhere close to what you need to actually be marketable. I think you need a lot of skills and a lot of familiarity with programming and programming concepts beyond just CSS. At that point, you're just a designer. You're not really a programmer. But HTML and CSS is a very valuable foundation upon which to build a web development career, definitely. JavaScript, definitely looking at JavaScript after that. All right, so we have a list element within our ordered list, and notice that within that list element I've included, and this is nesting, again, which we've looked at before, some text, and then another UL within which is more LIs. So a lot of nesting here, but this is just a way to sort of structure our data in the way that we want. And so at the end of this, as soon as I refresh, we're going to see number 1, and it's going to have, these are languages Tom knows, and then within that we're going to have another list, right? And as I said, we do have indeed, number 1, he knows the following languages, and then indented once again, so lists indent. We get another layer of indentation, and then we get English, German, and Spanish. And there is styling in lists in as much as if one list is indented at one level and another is indented at another level, those two lists get different default stylings. And you can default style whatever, you can override the style for whatever lists you want in their elements. But notice that the circles here are hollow, they're white circles. When we had it just at the base level, when just a single layer of indentation, they were black circles. So you get different styling, and it kind of helps you to visually see. For example, if we make this a UL, and I make this a UL, taking away the numbers, adding those dots again, and I refresh, the black is like level 1, and then hollow is level 2, and I actually don't know offhand what level 3 is, but easily we could just say, let's pretend that Tom is an actor.
Midwestern. Oh, okay.
And he
Thomas Ballatore actually is an actor with a Kevin Bacon number of 2.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you have a second degree towards Kevin Bacon? You know somebody?
The same name, Thomas Ballatore, Bacon number 2. Yeah.
Thomas.
Because he was in a Jim Carrey movie, and.
Interesting. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
So if I go into what we just did here and I type in another UL, and again I'm going to say English dialects, and this is just fictional at this point. I don't know whether you do or do not, and I won't ask you to prove in case unless you want to.
I can do the Boston one.
We'll say that he has a.
It's a baby wheel.
I guess how would you describe the default? I guess you would say Western accent. I guess a Californian, kind of like I don't know, not Illinois.
Hey, partner. Midwest.
I guess Illinois, right? That would be Midwest. I guess is fine.
Chicago. Them Bears.
Midwest.
The Bears.
I would say your accent to me sounds more just like vanilla American.
Vanilla Ice, yeah.
Yeah, Vanilla Ice, yes. We'll say that he has a southern accent of debatable quality, and then an English accent,
Yes.
Proper English accent.
Yes, of course.
Well, it sounds pretty good, actually.
Yes, thank you very much.
I'll take it. So now we have three lists that are nested, and then notice once again,
Is that a square?
we don't have a black circle, we don't have a white circle, we have black squares. So you keep nesting lists and you'll get different styles, and this is just a kind of debatable quality, low-key savage.
Yeah, that.
Just a friendly jab.
Spot on, man.
Just a friendly jab. Just a friendly jab. But this is how you nest HTML in concept, and you can apply this to any HTML element. You can nest arbitrarily HTML elements in and out of other elements. Change the style manually, Colton. He wants to wink. Oh, oof.
There was actually a question that went away about a PSD file to HTML, like a Photoshop design file. We're not going to address that tonight, but yeah, you would have issues with trying to get things lined up into your HTML. Maybe there'll be a CSS issue, but I did see the question. We just don't. I'm not going to address it probably tonight.
Yeah, I would have to. I'm actually not an expert on Photoshop and getting that to work in the context of a web page. I know that there are tools like Dreamweaver which have normally tried to solve that problem, which is another Adobe product, kind of an older Adobe product, and I don't think people typically use it much these days. People tend to use something like Wix or WordPress to lay out their websites because it's a little bit more reliable, popular. They have a lot of really cool tools built in. But yeah, based on an article Tom pulled up, you can mess around with websites in PSD. You can slice. It says they can be sliced and turned into HTML code, but that sounds like it's a pretty manual process, honestly. It sounds like they're referring to somebody like actually as a designer going into the assets and manually figuring out where all the alignments are. So probably not a one-to-one mapping of any kind. Vidya2232, Harry Zuin, and Luna079, thank you very much for the follow. Cool. So we did that. Somebody asked me if I could style something, I guess, manually, a list manually, and I could do that. Offhand, don't know the exact CSS tag, and again, this will be something I prepare in advance for the CSS stream, but I can go to CSS list element styling, for example, and just pull up what they have on W3 Schools, for maybe. And let's see, what do they have? List style type. Yeah, that looks like the particular CSS attribute that you would use to change the style. So if I were to just to say, and I would have to figure out, oh no, I would just do it by overwriting it on the UL itself. Yeah, so I would say UL, and I would say style is equal to list style type. And let's say that I wanted the first one to be square instead of circular, which it is by default. I would just literally type square like that. And this is sort of like embedded CSS within a tag, and this is, again, what we looked at earlier kind of with the width attribute, but that's a specific attribute. This more generally just means I can put any CSS in here that I want to, and it'll apply just to this tag, this specific tag. And so let's go ahead and run this. Let me make sure that I'm correct in this. So if I am correct, and I've done this properly, and I may not have, these circles on the very far left should turn to squares, and they did. So cool, easy. Wipe my hands.
Wix, is that the one that's like heavily advertising on YouTube? Like the first 5 seconds I skipped through it? I think there's like a Wix thing.
I don't know, I have an ad blocker, so I'm not sure.
Oh.
But
anyway, yeah, but Wix, yeah, definitely. I remember the first webpage I made, like then I had somebody actually who did web stuff do it, and he did everything like in Notepad, right? And I was like, well, why aren't you using like Macromedia Dreamweaver? He's like, dude, you just type it in. And David said that the other day, and people were like, really? You don't use like an editor? And it's, yeah. So.
Yeah, no, it's,
anyway.
The modern tools are really good, and I think most people now trying to do a basic website like a blog or even a very basic e-commerce site. I think it's generally pretty common that they will sort of use a tool that lets you sort of self-serve like that, like a Wix or a WordPress. But it's a little different. You still need to. There's a learning curve associated with learning that tool versus learning web development, and you're limited. They have only a core set of plugins that you're going to be able to use to get the content that you want.
Yep.
So you kind of have to do it, depending on what the needs of your website are. but I think it's great. WordPress. I'm not an expert on WordPress or Wix. WordPress is based in PHP if you want to actually program the plugins and stuff like that. I don't know as much about Wix. But they're great for, like I said, more static websites, things that are, it's a cheap way to get a website up and running without needing to be a web developer necessarily. But
if you're following the stream, you probably could just get Bootstrap and play along and probably come up with something, pretty good.
Yeah, Bootstrap is going to be an awesome stream. We'll cover that probably in a few weeks. I want to say maybe 2 weeks or so. Next week we have CSS and Render 50, and I'm going to take Bavik up on his offer, or on his challenge to do a Minesweeper. Actually, we're going to program Minesweeper in Love and Lua, which will be awesome. I've never programmed Minesweeper, but it's a very simple game. We can check it out.
WordPress is, talking about the Microsoft Word for HTML. Funny, like that client I was talking about, what was the issue with the client? I forget. The lorem ipsum sum thing. They had like a 30-page Word document that they just wanted dumped into a single HTML file, and design-wise, it was just horrible. So in Word, I just saved it as HTML and just put it up.
I guess
nobody's going to look at it anyway. So here you go. That's what you want. That's what you got. Nice. So I did actually use Word for HTML. And that was
That's interesting. I can't say I've ever done that, but that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Chips Challenge. Colton, do you remember that game? No, I don't. Chips Challenge. Top-down, tile-based puzzle video game for the Lynx.
No.
Oh, yeah, it looks kind of like Minesweeper, doesn't it? And there's a Windows version. Oh!
Commodore 64, Amiga? Okay.
No, I do remember this game. I played this on Windows 95, back in the day. Ah, I totally remember this game. That's crazy. Wow. Okay, that just opened up a pocket of information in my head that I thought was long gone. So I appreciate that, Adam. That's awesome. Wow, I totally forgot about that. That's super cool. We could make a game similar to that eventually. It's very simple. It's just if you have a particular key, move through a block and then get rid of it when you have it. The challenge there is just laying out your level such that it's logically parsable, or it's solvable. That's really the only challenge in that kind of tile-based game. It's very simple. Just move on a grid, which we essentially looked at with Snake, but in this case you would control your position. And do you know the name Jazz Jackrabbit? I do know the game, but I haven't actually played it.
There's a question above that about any advice on not turning your HTML into div soup. Okay, so a really important change with HTML5 is that a lot of the things where people would have div header, div footer, div main, they used to be hacks like that, and now they are their own full-fledged tabs, right? But of course, divs are still very useful when you do want to have a division of something in your page. You could use sections instead, perhaps, sometimes, but divs are definitely probably going to decrease in provenance as these other tags become more used.
Yeah, it's a semantic, this sort of so-called semantic elements, the header, footer, section, article, those kinds of things. Yeah, absolutely. Even Bootstrap kind of abstracts that out, has Jumbotron. Actually, it uses, not Jumbotron,
a lot of divs,
but it has some of its own tags that it uses kind of semantically very well, and doesn't have a ton of, it does have quite a few divs, but not as, I think, as many. I see Bootstrap likes to do nav a lot. I see that a lot.
Yeah.
We'll cover all of that. We'll have a separate stream. Cool. Creating themes for WordPress is not that hard, and it's way better than using third-party plugins to add custom HTML and CSS. Yeah, I'd have to do a deeper dive into it because I'm not super familiar with WordPress. But yeah, it's pretty popular amongst people for making sort of quicker, smaller, more static web pages that aren't as infrastructure heavy, like the Facebooks and Googles and stuff, crazy things that need crazy algorithms to work and manipulate massive amounts of data, like kind of e-commerce, like blogs, like simple websites. Good use case for WordPress and Wix. All right, so we covered lists now, so let's go ahead and talk about tables. Tables are pretty. What did you think, Bruce?
I thought we were going to forums, but hey, tables are cool too.
No, forums I actually have after tables, after tables, we do forums. So let's get rid of Chips Challenge. My name is Tom Ballatore. I love that. That's awesome. So we have a pretty cool web page here, and I feel like it'd be cool to make a table that kind of illustrates aspects of your character or something.
Oh, okay, character, yes. Okay, fine.
Your character or
my character.
Or you, something. We have a table, a Tom table.
A Tom table.
We should have a Tom table. But we have to figure out, first of all, what that Tom table would include.
Ooh,
so would it be maybe...
countries I've been to.
I guess.
Oh, that'd be too long.
Maybe, I'm trying to think, because you need rows and columns, right? A table is essentially like kind of an Excel doc almost. It's, it's a set of rows and columns where you arrange data in a rectangular sort of layout where you have things that are a row of information. Every, I guess maybe our rows are people, right? Maybe CS50 staff. Tom is the first row, and maybe there's foreign languages that person can speak, right? Japanese, English, German.
I see. You're getting 2D, man.
And maybe there's programming languages that person can speak. So maybe
Cool.
I don't know, JavaScript. Well, I'm trying to, in my head, kind of frame it out so we can have a bunch of diverse content. But this is great because we can actually use those GIFs. We can use the GIFs from the other website to integrate elements and make some really cool tables. So I'm going to delete.
Jabco, see you later. It's 3:26 in the morning.
Oh, Jabco Jason, oof, that's late. Well, thank you so much for tuning in spite of how late it is. Appreciate your attendance. We'll see you next time. Let's delete this UL, this overarching UL. Let's get rid of it. And I can afford you the luxury of taking the emphasis away from you. We'll say, why is CS50 awesome?
Oh, it is.
Which is CS50 is awesome, right? And we'll get rid of your image too. For now, it's not gone forever. It's not gonna be gone forever.
Okay.
We're gonna use it again. I promise you that.
All right.
So we're gonna get rid of that. I'm gonna go back here and refresh, and you can see that now we have a web page that just says, why is CS50 awesome? CS50 is awesome for a lot of reasons, in my opinion, but we're going to specifically say, why is the CS50 staff awesome, right? Oh. So it would be kind of tedious to just have like a picture of maybe Tom here, a list of all the things that are cool about him, and then a picture of David underneath that and all the things that are cool about David, and then a picture of maybe Brian and all the things that are cool about Brian. But instead, what we can do is lay things out in 2 dimensions and actually take use of some of the horizontal spacing that we have in our web page. So let's go ahead and do that. And the way we do that, first of all, as we've already sort of alluded to, is we use what's called a table. And a table is not unlike what you would see, for example, in an Excel spreadsheet. Something that looks kind of like this. I'm looking for, here we go, this is perfect. So a table this is exactly sort of what a table is. It's effectively a 2D layout of rows and columns. So you can see here, all the rows are marked with numbers, and all the columns are marked with letters of the alphabet. So in this case, at row A1, or cell A1, and each of these little individual rectangles are called cells, we can maybe say that every single A column, at column A, for every single row, that's going to be the person's name. Right, so if Tom were the first entry, he were at row 1, column A would be name, so Tom would go here. Mm-hmm. This would be Tom. And then maybe languages that they can speak, Japanese, English, German, that would go in cell B1, right? Okay. B would be the column for everyone's language that they can speak. And then maybe C would be instruments they can play. Ooh. So do you play any instruments by chance?
Yeah, piano, marginally.
Okay.
So, but yeah, no concerts.
We'll say piano marginally.
Yeah.
In cell C1, that'll be Tom. His instrument that he can play is the piano, marginally. We'll just say piano.
The stream brought to you by Snapple.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
The best thing about being on CS50 staff is you can go to the refrigerator and just like take a drink.
Yeah, so true. We got a lot of great, amazing drinks. Shout out to Valerie, one of our staff, who's our logistics specialist. She takes care of a lot of things, including making sure we have amazing snacks and drinks. I'm going to go ahead and create a table. So I'm creating essentially a spreadsheet here, and you can format this however you want. Eventually, by default, the formatting is going to essentially take the largest element of any given column or row and just kind of make that row or column that large. It just accounts for the largest possible use case that we have the content. So it kind of auto sizes, which is pretty great. So you can have an arbitrarily sized image, and it basically won't override the size of a grid. It's not a uniformly sized grid. It's a dynamically scaling grid, right? Brenda says she misses Snapple. I guess they don't have Snapple in New Zealand. That's tragic.
The sheep drank it all.
Brenda, Snapple.
The sheep drank it all, is what I said.
Sorry, the sheep drank it.
The sheep drank it all.
I thought you said the sheep drink it all.
I'm making a New Zealand joke there, but
got it. Yes. Okay, I flew right over.
Sorry.
I misunderstood. Table. So a couple of things. So tables are a grid of cells in rows and columns, but they also have a head, and you probably have seen this in an Excel doc, for example. That I got rid of the image tragically. But we'll say Excel spreadsheet once again. And I'm going to go back down here to where this was. And you know, looking at a spreadsheet, you might not know necessarily what it is, what the data is. If you're just looking at it, and especially if the data is relatively arcane, it's not as basic as name, languages spoken, instruments played. If it's, you know, financial data or other information, we might not know what column A or column B or column C denote. So we usually have what's called a header row, a head. And this is where we can say names go here, instruments go here, languages go here. And that will apply to the entire column for every subsequent row. Deviant 77, Luna 079, Robex 123, and Hafez. Thank you very much for the follow. Let me make sure I didn't miss anybody else. Harry Zuin and Vitia2232, I believe I got them. So thanks all of you for following. Appreciate it. There's some crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, can you hear that?
I don't know if anybody can hear that, but there's like a herd of animals out there doing something. T-head is going to be that exact idea that I just illustrated. The idea of a single row that's going to basically enumerate what's going to be in each column for our table. And it's going to display as such. And just like a T-head, we also have a T-body. And this is kind of an analog to what we see with the HTML document itself. So I'm going to go ahead and in my T-head, I'm going to do, so I believe you can technically use TDs here, but the trend is to do TH, so a T-head element. This is going to be table head element rather. And what this is going to do is these are the individual one by one columns in our spreadsheet, in our table. Right? So I can say name, or actually what I should say is picture, because we are going to want a column for the picture. We're going to use the GIFs again. I'm going to say name. I'm going to say languages spoken, just short for languages that person can speak, and then instruments played. Or rather, we'll just say instruments, and then we'll say languages. Right. And I'm just going to render this as is first so we can see what it looks like. And indeed, we do see that we have sort of laid out here picture, name, languages, and instruments. But one thing that people are probably noticing is that this looks pretty bad. We actually don't have any way to differentiate where our columns are, where our cells are, where our rows are. So I'm going to do just a very quick and dirty border equals 1 string, and notice that it sort of marked it in red. That's just basically saying this is a deprecated attribute. You don't want to do this. You typically don't want to do this. This is another sort of styling going with the HTML, kind of an old attribute not working out, but it allows us to very quickly illustrate the way that this table has laid out our information. We have picture, we have name, we have languages, and we have instruments.
That is ugly as sin, isn't it?
A little bit, a little bit. It's better than nothing, though. I would,
yeah, well, absolutely, yeah.
But yeah, certainly
deprecated for other reasons, but
Tom got angry for a moment.
I was not angry. No, I was just I don't know what I was. I'm always happy.
Yeah, Tom's a pretty happy guy. I've never seen Tom angry. Only if you're working in multiple dimensions. Why would you do that?
There's a question about like using nested tables, and there's somebody asking, and I can't read the name from here, but about using email in a, where was it? Did it go off the top?
How to create a responsive HTML email using tables. This is going to kind of differ depending on your email provider, right? Because I think in Gmail you can embed HTML, but for example, if you're using Outlook or if you're using Yahoo or Hotmail, I'm not sure how they actually serve it, whether they have an HTML parser on their backend that can take HTML that you specify within your email message and actually render that on the, depending on, it also depends on the client of your email. Maybe you're using an email program that doesn't render HTML, so it just kind of shows, it literally will just, in that case, show you HTML, the HTML words. It will basically render it like it's plain text. So it's kind of up to your service at that point. It's not I don't think, a standardized thing. Miyake says that is a beautiful table, and the table has some retro feel. I would agree that it's a retro feel. I'm not sure if it's beautiful, but it's going to look beautiful because we're going to have Tom's picture in it pretty soon. So I'll show you. We'll show you how this looks. So T-body. Now within a T-body, we have to specify, because I can just start writing elements again, but it's just going to, how is it going to know when to break to the next row? How is it going to know this is Tom's row, this is Colton's row? I don't know if I'm going to put myself in here, but I actually don't have a picture on the CS50 website. Embarrassingly enough, I didn't show up that day. I should have. I think it didn't occur to me. We were shooting pictures. But we'll use David. We'll use Tom, and then we'll use Brian. We'll use Brian because I know Brian plays some instruments and speaks some languages.
Oh, yeah.
And I know he has a picture on the CS50 website for sure. So the way that we actually enumerate the rows in our body is going to be using TRs, so table row is how you can think of it. I think that's actually what it's short for. But within a table row, now we can actually do kind of what we did up here with table head, in that we can enumerate all of the columns, all of the cells, table data rather, with the TD keyword, right? So it's TH, it's like a table head piece of data, and I think you technically can use TD here, it just won't be bolded. But TD is what it expects to exist within each table row. So these are the individual cells within a given row, the TDs. And then the row itself is marked out by the TR.
TD standing for?
I think it's table data. I'm
Yes.
not 100% sure. Is that what
it is,
what it
yes.
is? Okay.
Yes.
So we're going to say, this is going to be our first row, and this is a great opportunity actually to say how to do comments in HTML.
Oh, yeah.
I want to say this is Tom's row.
You just did some wicked like shortcutting there.
No, I just typed it.
Oh, and it auto-completed.
Yeah. Like,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So VS Code is great, and it does that. A lot of text editors will do that. But what I did was I typed this less than, and then an exclamation point, which is kind of what we've seen with the doc type HTML thing, and then dash dash. And what that's done is anything that I type within the bounds of this new sort of tag that we've seen is actually going to be completely ignored by HTML by our web browser when it renders the HTML. So this allows us to associate hidden data that's only for the programmers or for the people reading it in Chrome. And we can say, this is going to be Tom's row, and then when we want to close it, we want to get back to the actual HTML that contains our information. We can say dash dash greater than, and that closes it. You can sort of think of this as being its own sort of tag that can be arbitrarily sized. So this is going to be Tom's row, and I'm going to say that's Tom Ballatore, right? And actually, that's not accurate. It needs to be picture first. So TD.
Okay.
So this is going to be. Here's another showcase for embedding tags within other tags. I can say image source is equal to tom.gif, right? Just like we did before. And then I can say, because we're doing it in order of picture, name, languages, instruments, this needs to be the case for every row. Otherwise, there's going to be some inconsistency with our information, which is important that we not do that. So I'm going to say Tom Ballatore. I'm going to say languages that you can speak. So we'll say English, Japanese,
there you go.
and German.
No, stop saying German.
Well, let's say a little bit, just for
Swahili.
just for a little bit, and then instruments, piano, a little bit, right? Because you just
Yeah, a little bit.
a little bit. And then let's go ahead and refresh this, and notice that now, not only do we have a new row, it also styled everything kind of, it included the styling that we included with our table head, but it also put it into our row here. And notice that every cell is only as large as it needs to be to contain the largest size of the other cells. For example, all of these cells are as vertically tall as they need to be in order to support this image, because they're all in the same row, right? If this image were larger than these other cells, your data would look a little weird. Your table would be kind of skewed. These would be bumped up in a weird way. Each individual cell, in terms of its horizontal width, is as large as the text that it contains. For example, you can see all of these cells are exactly as large as the strings they contain. Tom Ballatore, English, Japanese, and German, and piano a little bit.
Good question here. What if, let's say, you were missing the one for English, Japanese, and German? If you only had 3 TDs inside there.
Good question. I have to imagine.
Why don't we see what would happen?
Probably gives it a.
Can you comment that out, maybe?
Yeah, let's do that. So missing the languages one you said.
Yeah.
So the first thing that we can immediately assume is that this is going to get shifted over 1. Because it's going to see, it does it based on the order it sees the tags, right? So we know that this is at least going to get shifted over, but what's going to happen to instruments? That'll be fairly interesting to look at. So let's refresh, and we see that it's just empty. Nothing gets placed there. No box actually gets placed there. So part of the styling involves putting a rectangle there if and only if there's actually some content in that cell, right?
So the workaround would be to just have an empty TD tag, right?
Yeah, an empty TD tag.
Like if there were no languages.
If you wanted to get the square there, because I actually kind of like the fact that there's no square there. So I guess it comes down to a matter of style. But yeah, in that case, you would say maybe put an empty TD.
Yeah.
But I guess if you mean to say if for example name was empty, right? Oh, I see what you mean. In this case, yeah, this needs to get shifted over. So I misinterpreted what you said.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, don't apologize. My fault. So in this case. If I wanted to, for example, just say, let's say that we don't know what languages you speak, and we wanted to comment this out. we would exactly do what you said. We would put an, oh, did I screw that up?
Yeah,
Oh,
it
closed automatically, yeah. What we would do is we would just put, like you just said, an empty TD, refresh, and indeed the language is now, the emptiness is in the right spot, but, well, that's it. The emptiness is in the right spot now. It's not shifted. We just had to put empty placeholder data into our DOM to make sure it worked. Let's make sure I'm keeping up with comments, because I feel like I have not been reading any.
I've been reading them, and we're of course skipping a few things. There are good points here, though. This issue about tables with responsive design. I think there's definitely other ways of. I think tables get abused in the sense that people want to lay out their thing like in a grid or something, so they use tables to do it and just don't have margins. That's definitely a problem. There are other ways around that with either Flexbox or grid, but.
Oh, sure, yeah, Flexbox would be great for that, yeah. Align data that's like responsive. Yeah.
It just does all that work for you.
Yeah, we'll use Flexbox in a future stream, and we'll cover sort of the use cases for that. One thing I don't like about this table is that it's kind of like the picture is really large, and it's also kind of grainy. I want to make the image just a little bit smaller, so I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually set this width to 100 pixels. Just how we did before. So now the table is just a little bit, it's a little bit easier on the eyes, I think. And then we can go ahead and take out this, and that's not a jab at you and the size of your image, by the way.
That's fine. 100 pixels is cool enough.
Oh, I screwed that up because now we have the empty TD. And notice that if you have an extraneous TD, if that's the right word, I apologize if that's the wrong word. If you have an extra TD, it actually does the same thing that we saw earlier, but with the table header. The table header gets added an extra bit of space to account for this weird sort of external element that's not accounted for by the table head, right? So that's kind of a cool little thing to look at. So it's refreshed, everything's aligned. Let's go ahead and add an entry for David. I'm actually going to just copy and paste this whole thing, and the table body will just scan for as many TRs as it sees, and just add a row, a row, a row, a row until the end of until it reaches the slash tbody tag. And I'm going to change some of these. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to get David's picture off the CS50 website. Let's do that. That's the most important step. And I'm going to get Brian's as well while I'm there. So I'm going to go over to the staff page. It should be cached now, which is nice. We'll save David's image. We'll call this david.gif. And then we'll call Brian's brian.gif. And now what I can do is I can say this should be david.gif. I'm going to copy this again, and this should be brian.gif. Should I spell it david.gif and then brian.gif? The comments need to be updated, so this should be Brian's row, this should be David's row. David's name is not Tom Ballatore. It is David J. Malin. He speaks English, Spanish, and Italian, and he plays drums. And then Brian's row, Brian Yu, he speaks English and Spanish. He might speak more. I actually don't know if he speaks more than English and Spanish. I know he at least speaks Spanish, and he plays piano. And he might play more instruments than piano. That's all. That's just the only instrument I happen to know that Brian speaks. If Brian's in the chat, Brian, definitely let us know what languages you speak and what instruments you play, and I'll add them. I'll update it. But you can see that now, because we've added a couple of table rows, TRs, and the right TDs, the table data, in the right places, we have a full table here. You know, a list of information that's sort of all evenly, nicely, horizontally aligned. It's not, you know, a bunch of verticality in as much as we have an image with a list of all these interests. Everything's laid out in a way that we can visually see it much more easily. And this is an important thing, obviously, in the era in which they created HTML and HTTP and the internet and wanted to transmit information. And in science, certainly, you see tables laid out all the time that pair data with other bits of data. So this is a useful thing, and it's something that we can certainly use now, even in the modern era. With some styling, we can make it look awesome. What is your name, author? I'm guessing you're referring to me. So my name is Colton Ogden, and this is Tom Ballatore. I'm a CS50 full-time staff member, technologist at Harvard, and Tom, what company?
I'm a teaching fellow.
And what company do you work for in Japan?
Lake Basin Action Network.
Okay.
It's, basically doing remote sensing and GIS work.
Nice. And you also, like you said, you TF CS50. You're here all the time. Well, I mean, as much as you can afford to come.
As much as I can, yes.
Because I know it's probably very time-consuming to make that trip. It must be exhausting.
Flying from Japan, I get real tired.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Sorry, that was really stupid.
But yeah, that is tables. You know, tables are very important. This is the basics of tables. You can do the same thing with tables that you can do with anything else, in as much as nesting tags and getting very intricate layouts for things. You can put lists into tables. You can put paragraphs into table elements. You can put more images. You can put lists with images in them. Really, it's meant to be a very flexible format that allows you to do just about anything. Now, I realize we're getting close to the 3-hour mark, so the last thing I want to cover before we end is forms, because we said we'd get into forms. Forms are a very important aspect of HTML and HTTP in general, and so it serves us, I think, to appropriately serves us.
Yeah.
It serves us serving over.
And while you're getting that ready, there's a great discussion in the bottom here with Brenda saying, do you need alt attributes for images?
Yeah,
and somebody
you want to talk about alt.
well,
yeah.
And then somebody saying alt attributes are not necessary. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the page will render fine, but if people can't see, they're not going to be able to understand what the image is if they can't see it. So you really should be having alt images. I mean, we're just sort of playing around now and assuming that everyone's seeing this, but definitely any image you have to have good alt text. There's really an art to that. Let's say if you like Mona Lisa, like, what do you write? I'm like, woman in old painting, like semi-smiling kind of. I mean, alt text is really difficult, but you can definitely find ways around that. So you definitely put alt tags for images and other things like that.
Yeah, let's actually, I forgot that was we got so caught up in like this awesome set of stuff that we, originally you wanted to talk about all the alt stuff. We should definitely do that. So I think we should maybe take an extra, are you okay with taking an extra like 20, 30 minutes to cover that in addition to forms, or do you have to leave?
No, I'm cool with that, but I think people are probably getting tired. But yeah, that's fine. We can. Yeah. Go ahead.
So let's definitely do that. And I apologize if I'm not keeping up with the stream. And yes, to Paulton, yes, Colton Ogden is my name. Clipped, NaCl says they took a sub clip of the video. I don't remember exactly. Sure. Do you need alt attributes for those images? And yeah, to your point, yes, ideally. We would say man who does not look 48 spinning around in place. We would say for this one.
I wonder if we actually did have alt images here. I'm checking right now, but okay. So anyway, go ahead.
I'm going to sort of nix this table, and instead I'm going to turn it into a form. So we're going to say this. Why is the CS50 staff awesome? And then I'm going to make a form that says give me all of your information. Just like that. And this is going to be an illustration of a very important idea, and that is sending information to other places. So it's one thing to be able to click links and to go places and to see information, but it's another thing to actually interact with people via the web page. And the only way you can really do that is, discounting what things you can do with JavaScript, is the use of a form, an HTML form. And so all a form is, and I'm just going to lay out some simple stuff, is a set of fields, a set of UI elements that are interactive, that you can type information into, select information from a predetermined list of things. We're not going to cover every possible use case for forms in this example, but we are going to talk about some of the basic stuff, some of the basic fields and bits of UI that you can indeed use. So I have a form that's just like we've used any other tag. It's just a form, and there's going to be other elements to that, attributes that we can look at. But for now, we're just going to focus on input. And I'm going to say input type is equal to text. And if I do that, we notice that we get a little text bar here. And so this is something that you see when you're doing, for example, a login form or a registration form, and you have to type your name. It's going to be in a text field. It's going to be in an input that is of type text, type being an attribute on that HTML tag, which tells the browser to render it and give you certain capabilities, certain user interaction, right? And I can do, yet again, another field. And I can say this one's going to be type is equal to password, right? And so now I have two, and notice that these are not block level elements, these are inline elements, so they're all just going to completely keep going and wrapping when they get to the far right edge of the screen. If I type into the first element, it gives me the ability to do that. I now have interaction with my website in a way that I didn't have before. I can type things. If I were to type something in the other one, because it's of type is equal to password, Chrome is actually saying you shouldn't be able to see what's in there. I'm going to put dots there, and you won't actually be able to interact. You won't be able to visibly see. This is meant to be private. This is a private field. It's a password. People might be looking over your shoulder. Put dots there, right? So that's essentially what essentially basically what a form is. And usually after you've combined and mixed and matched a bunch of other elements, which we'll take a look at, you're going to use what's called a button. And your button can say submit. And once you've submit, you end up using, triggering that form. That form will trigger an HTTP request, and it will go to some URL. And by default, that URL, if you don't specify, is the same page that you're on already. So normally, for example, if I'm logging into Facebook and I click log in, I'm not going back to the login page. I'm actually going back to, well, maybe the way they structured it, it could be a redirect to the login page, but generally it'll be to like a serve page, serve me my data page, some sort of, and they've probably done it abstractly in software, so there's not like a concrete HTML page, everything's in software, but it's that idea. That form needs to send its information somewhere. If I have my name, Colton, and password 123, and I submit this, I should send that form, that information, to some other URL on the internet. And it is going to be a URL. It's going to be an HTTP or HTTPS URL. What version of HTML are you targeting? HTML5. His photo isn't on the site since he didn't show up on the day they were taking them. He mentioned it a little while ago. So did you press this? Oh yeah, for my my picture's not there. Yeah, my bad. I should have done it. He wasn't there when they had a photo shoot. W3C has some good documentation regarding accessibility. Etc. Also has a course on edX. How is HTML parsed? Can you talk about the internals? Says Razawa36. That's going to come down to the browser implementation. That's going to be like Chromium. It's going to be part of the code base, and I haven't taken a deep look into it. And I'm sure that engineers of that could probably go on for hours and days and weeks about how they've designed their parser. But effectively, it's going to have to look for symbols and figure out, given the string that it's in, basically if it sees a tag and that tag is P and it sees the closing bracket, read everything until it gets to the next tag, the next less than sign, and make sure that it's the same tag. And if it is, create a virtual, some information in software that maps to that, render it using some drawing logic. It's kind of complicated. And you need to be, I think, on the actual engineering team to be able to talk authoritatively about it.
Yeah, if you look at the developer tools, let's say in Chrome, you'll see like DOM load time, like the document object model. I mean, obviously all these tags are going to be loaded in some sort of tree structure in which there are parents and children of children. So I think you can see like a load time for that, but the actual like mechanics of how do they put things into that tree structure and what exactly the tree structure is. What is it called? It's like a B tree or something?
The name's familiar, but I'm not entirely sure.
I can't remember.
A red-black tree? I'm not sure. That's used in a lot of realms. I'm not sure if they, I doubt they use it. It's not, in this case, it's not going to be a red-black tree, but for the DOM, probably not. But that's a B tree, yeah, something like that. Pirate Pants, thank you very much for the follow. Appreciate it. And Mixel, I don't remember if I said Mixel1. No, I did not say that. It was 1 minute ago. Mixel1, thank you very much for the follow as well. But yeah, good question. That's a very advanced engineering topic. I don't have the knowledge about it, so we probably shouldn't talk about it too much. But certainly, what's it called? What's the runtime? V8, the Chromium V8 engine. That's on, and I'm not sure if that's actually, no, that's not Chromium. Sorry, that's Node.js. Chromium, which I think has the backend for all the rendering, is probably, I'm not sure if it's open source. I think it's open source. Google that, see if that pulls anything up. If anything, you can see the code base, and I think it's all C++. Yeah, V8 is the JavaScript engine. I had that conflated with the Chromium engine, which I believe, and I'm not 100% sure, but I believe Chromium is the backend that actually does the parsing, the literal parsing of HTML and converting that into the DOM, and therefore, and also the visual elements of it. Digicrests, thank you very much for the follow. Appreciate it. I've seen you in the stream, and glad that you're now following. Okay, cool. So we have text fields, another important thing. And like I said, we won't go into the detail. I have a lot of other stuff we could talk about with forms, and I think we might go into more detail on forms in a later stream. We are going to do an advanced HTML stream, which is going to cover canvas, it's going to cover iframes, semantic elements, it's going to cover what else do I want to cover? Validation, client-side validation, using the built-in validation tools that you get in Chrome, which isn't the be-all, end-all of validation, but certainly a nice thing to look at. And then forms, I think, in more detail with post and get requests and how that actually translates to query strings and how you can use that to interact with your own website and other people's websites. We'll talk about all that stuff. The one thing I do want to talk about is select objects. And a select is essentially, and I believe these take in options. A select is just a fancy way of saying a drop-down menu. And a select, so I can say options, so I can say, and then placeholder. I don't think they take placeholders. I think I would need to say option and choose an instructor, right? And then we would say Tom Ballatore, we would say, and these should probably actually be on one line, David J. Malin. Got some tough competition there.
Oh, yeah.
But put your name first to give you a leg up.
Ooh, thank you.
Option, and then we'll say Brian Yu. And if I refresh this, notice that we do indeed get a drop-down. It's nicely styled because this is actually done by your operating system, all these UI elements. But you can say, it says choose an instructor, and then we do indeed see Tom Ballatore. In the order that we added them, we see Tom Ballatore, David J. Malin, and Brian Yu. And we won't, I don't think we have time to go into submitting forms and how that all works and actually parsing that information when we get to another web page, because we are at 3 hours. We do want to talk about alt stuff real quick. Before we conclude, but this is the foundation upon which you would submit this information to another location. And this is how you get UI elements effectively. So if anybody has any questions on the basics of forms, I know we didn't cover as much about forms as I would have liked to. We will in the future. But if you have any questions on the stuff that we have covered, definitely toss them in the chat. And then if not, I think we should talk about alt.
Yeah.
Or accessibility in general, I should say.
Yeah, let's talk about some things like
Sure.
that. Yeah.
Let me know.
Can I have your HDMI, or should I do it on your computer?
Yeah, you can do it on your computer. So
Okay.
it's going to go black for just a second. Apologies while we do that.
All right.
Go ahead and plug right in.
Alrighty.
We have a switcher normally, but it's not hooked up. So we could have done like a little bit of fancy
And
switching.
I was late.
No, that's okay. Actually, you were earlier than I expected.
I was. Alrighty, here we go. Let's see.
Would you do a separate stream about DOM? It would be nice. Yeah, that's a plan. I do want to go into DOM, and actually I want to go into DOM scripting more specifically. So talking about using the window API, doing things like document.get element by ID, that sort of thing, manipulating the DOM manually as opposed to using jQuery, that sort of thing. Let me resize your window.
I was gonna say, can I go to?
Yeah, it like resizes based on the display settings of your machine.
Yes.
So I'm going to.
Should I not be doing this?
No, you're fine. What size do you want
to go to scale?
Do you want to do 720?
720 is probably best, right?
Okay, I might have to
nice and big.
I'm gonna have to resize it then. Okay, cool. Blip.
Okay.
All right.
Looks good.
Cool. Fantastic.
Yeah, so like when I was first learning HTML, like I had the question of like, well, what tags should I really learn? Because there's like 100 and how many tags are there? I don't know. And at the time, there was really no information.
You want to actually come a little bit closer to me too?
Sure.
Let's get going.
All right. So at the time, like I couldn't really find any information. There was like a Google study from like 2006 where they would scrape a bunch of web pages and see how many tags there were. And I'm speaking about like unique tags on a given page, like how many pages use a div tag, not how many div tags are on a given page. And I just, before coming here, I was like, I should see if they've updated information, and there is some. So if you're looking at this and wondering, watching the stream, thinking what tags are really important, head and HTML are in apparently every page, and you can. Oh, the link for this, if we have a chat, which I'm not.
We do. It's a little bit finicky at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not logged into the chat online.
Anyway, let me.
Can you go to what did you type in Google? Type in the Google words, and then folks online can type the same search thing.
Yeah, I would type in. Actually, how did I find it? Let me go back. Frequency of tags, HTML.
Yeah, that's the first thing.
It was not the first thing. It was a
second.
CSS tricks, was just an incredible
okay,
page. Yeah.
Cool.
So yeah, frequency of HTML tags, and then CSS tricks. Yeah. So let's take a look at these. What were the top ones? Were of course what you're expecting. Yeah, head, HTML, body.
So 1% of pages don't have a body tag.
Yeah, which makes you wonder. I guess it's just like an SEO thing, maybe.
I guess it must be.
Who knows? Titles.
Search engine optimization for anybody who's not familiar with that terminology.
Yes. Meta, div, a, script. Script surprises me. I mean, I guess everybody's just using JavaScript.
Yeah, well, I mean, JavaScript's pretty ubiquitous. I would expect.
But 88.5? Aren't there like more static things out there?
I mean, even the static websites will sometimes have like really simple JavaScript.
That's true. Yeah. And then link, image, p, span. What didn't we talk about? Style. Yeah, this one sort of like shouldn't be doing that.
Style we'll be covering that in the CSS one. Yeah, that shouldn't be in necessarily. I mean, in and of itself, it's not terrible if you do it in small amounts, but I would say it's much better practice to just use a separate CSS file and you use that with a link tag.
Yep.
And also
input.
Dark World saying, what a great language, HTML. HTML is awesome. DigiCrest says, any plans for Vue, React, or Angular? And then Jacques says, Colton already said they wouldn't cover React. And that's actually not true. I actually very much want to cover React It's less likely that we'll cover Angular, but maybe I'll look into Angular. It's another sort of single page application, sort of like UI, HTML extension language, kind of like React is, or not language, framework like React is. It's another way of sort of modern web development. We'll take a look possibly at that, but definitely React, ostensibly Angular and Vue, but less likely.
Cool. So this had nothing to really do with accessibility, and the reason I was talking about accessibility is just
I think it's cool.
Coming up, and definitely check out this page. There's a lot of other things here. I'm not going to be talking about the doc types. Most are HTML5 now. You've got some of this transition stuff still there. Yeah, just go through this. It's really cool. Okay.
Stats, big data.
It's nice because I was thinking I wanted this more modern data than the 2006 because so many tags have changed since then. And I was thinking I could have a student for CS50 for a final project do this. And maybe they still could, but yeah, so a lot of it's done right here. Let's look at some other things. There's this issue I always have with HTML. It's really hard to find mistakes in your code, and you'll be doing something, and especially we'll get to this with CSS. If you forget the closing brace, you won't have some certain styles. Maybe some might go through, but others won't, and it's really hard to debug, I think. So one of the things here is this validators that exist. There's many of these, an online one, W3 Schools.
You did mention that, yeah.
Yeah. So let's do this. Let's take CSS Tricks, this web page, copy the URL, go over here, and let's actually validate it and see if it passes the tests.
If it does not.
Okay, so they're getting some warnings. Okay, there's let's see. You don't need this, I guess. But warnings. Okay, error. Element style not allowed as child element of header. Ooh.
Ah, interesting.
Element stop is missing required attribute offset. Okay, I don't know what stop is, but I guess it's something.
I don't know either, to be honest.
Okay, so, and then you can go through here and basically see the errors. Now, obviously the page is rendering well from my perspective when I'm looking at it. I'm getting great information from it. But generally, if you're taking a class in HTML or something, you should probably be running it through one of these checkers to just make sure that your code actually is as per the specification. Another thing you can do is, let's say we go here, and we go to, I'm going to do a little well, no, I won't do a shortcut. I'll do View, Developer, View Source. And I'm going to actually just Control-All, copy all of this over here. And I'm going to go to Sublime Text. And I'm going to drop all of this HTML that I just stole from that page right into my thing here. And
this is literally what you're getting sent over the digital airwaves, so to speak.
If it was not being sent to me, how would my browser be able to render the web page?
Exactly.
This is all in the open, essentially. So you can just totally copy web page. Well, whether you can legally do it or morally do it, but you can just sort of grab it and just make your own web page based on this. But one thing you can do, I like Sublime because it's got all these different packages that you can put into it. And validators is one of those, so you could then validate this file with HTML5. I kind of like this one because it gives you a nice list of the line number, and it's just pretty much pointed to a lot of errors here. But
yeah, that's pretty cool. And this is actually kind of similar to what somebody requested earlier. They were saying, are there any cool sort of plugins for web development for VS Code? This is something I have to imagine there's an analog for with VS Code, but in this particular example, you're using Sublime Text. But
yeah,
the key takeaway being there are plugins catered towards web development for text editors that function for these use cases, these awesome use cases to help you debug, or in this case, better distribute your web page for certain folks, for certain demographics in this case.
Let's see, there's a stray end tag A on 2045. Let's actually find it. 2045, 2045, 2020, this is a big web page, 2045.
Another illustration
right here,
that
maybe.
One given web page ultimately is just one huge file too. It's not being sent to you in multiple files. Even if you have multiple files, when we get to frameworks like Flask or React, where you have JavaScript and you have, HTML or templates in multiple files, ultimately it all has to get put into one file that your browser renders for a given window. It's not like you're getting multiple different files that all come together at the browser level. That's all packaged ultimately into one thing, including the script.
Yep. You can do the same thing with CSS. Why don't we try CS50? I checked it earlier. There were no errors.
CS50 is on top of it.
So yeah, but let's do this. So
I'm not terribly
CS50.
surprised.
CS50, let's check out what CSS are they using. They're using Bootstrap, but they've also got some of their own CSS, I'm sure. Is this, where is it actually? Is it right?
Hello from a sunny Saturday afternoon. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks, Dave Code. Appreciate it. Thanks very much for tuning in. Good to have you.
Okay, let's just assume this is the CSS, so I can pull this down, copy all of that. I'm going to dump it into a new file right here, and we're going to run a validator for CSS also, which you can do.
And Kerberos X, I apologize if I didn't mention, thank you for your follow.
Okay, and errors come back. This is still the errors from the other one. I don't know why that's not coming up here. Oh, I didn't save it as a CSS file. So CS50.css, okay, save it right there. Oh, I'm in the wrong location, of course. Yes, I understand that. Just one second. I don't know why it went to my hard drive. That's kind of weird. Desktop, and we're just going to save it. That's okay, test, whatever. Boom, save it. And now let's try the validation on the CSS, which tells us that indeed, I don't know why it's not coming up, of course, because I'm doing it live without having tested this. What we could actually do is go to the online checker for this, and I've got it somewhere, the W3 School CSS validation service. And you could just pop a web page in here, a CSS file in here, and you can get all the errors that might be there. Another thing, you'll get to this later.
The Zen Garden, yeah.
Well, can I finish with that?
Yeah.
Okay, because that'll be a nice lead into the CSS stuff that's coming up.
Yeah, no, definitely.
With the accessibility stuff, yeah, let's see. Favorite websites. Somebody want to drop like a website in a nice legit website, that family-friendly website, into the chat that we can check out to see if it's accessibly friendly.
And Rezu with 36, I'm studying advanced algebra for a final on Sunday. It's 1:10 a.m. and I'm watching you guys. Greetings from Serbia. Thanks very much.
Sweet.
Appreciate it. Good luck with your final on Sunday.
Wanikani?
Oh, Wanikani. That's
Is that safe?
it's a Japanese studying thing. I've used it.
Oh, okay, cool. TTP.
Before you do that, let me make sure that's the same Wanikani.
Yeah, I'm not going to hit enter here.
Wanikani.com, is that what it says?
Cool.
Yeah,
looks good.
I have used this, yeah.
All right, so here it comes. Ooh, there are 9 errors on the Wanikani page with 1 alert, 1 feature, blah, 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 blah. So let's see. If we go right here, you can get the errors. So, basically it's missing alternate text on, like, if you click right here, you can find, well, where will it be? If I click on this one like this, it'll say, okay, right here, basically there's this picture of Andrew Elliott. But if you go under the hood, let me do this one here. Andrew, is that, hold on, so let me go to Wanikani directly. Wanikani. Huh, that means crocodile crab, by the way.
Wanikani.
Yeah. What am I doing now? I'm going to go to view source, and then I'm also going to find, what was that guy's name? He didn't have an
Andrew Elliott.
Thank you. Let's find Andrew Elliott. Okay, so he's got to have like a JPEG somewhere. Yeah. So basically, it's a testimonial. There's no alt text right here. I mean, there should be alt that says, picture of Andrew Elliott or something. Okay, but without that alt text, you don't know what it is if you can't see it, right?
Brenda was saying crocodile crab. My daughter just said that.
Cool.
Or the alt crab.
The alt crab. All right, so that's another thing you can do with this. And this website is Wave. We can just put in Web Accessibility Evaluation Tool, and it comes up with some really cool stuff. One thing, like, okay, my eyes as I get older, the issue I have mainly, some of the colorblind issues, but also right here, there should be something, go back to here, contrast errors. Like something that's really popular lately is like sort of like light gray, thin fonts on like a white background. And if you got young eyes, maybe it's really easy to see. I just struggle with that. So if you go to contrast errors, you can see that indeed, where is this listed? Right here, perhaps. Oh, right here. So if you go to this tab up here, you'll see that in various areas. Yeah, this is maybe, depending on your screen and your eyes, it might be contrasty enough, but definitely they'll give you very low contrast. And there's ways of looking at the brightness or color of the text on top of the background, and maybe the size even gets figured in. I'm not sure how they calculate that. But this is really nice if you want to make sure your website should be really visible, and if it's not somebody who can actually see, has the proper alt tags, this is a good way to like make sure that all of your errors. Should we do CS50?
Sure.
I got confidence because I'm hoping, but
so far it looks like we did really well with that last evaluator.
come on, fingers crossed.
Some contrast.
Contrast. Well, forget that. That's no big deal. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, let's go right here. Question mark errors. Let me reload that. Oh, and let me reload here, I guess. 0 errors. David, are you out there, David? Good job, or whoever is designing this page. There's some. Oh, and there are no contrast errors. That was. I don't know why that happened.
Maybe it had. Maybe it was still looking at the contrast.
I think it was because it's the same number. Yeah.
Yeah.
So good job, CS50. There's a one alert. What is the alert?
Website is awesome. Website is too awesome.
Very interesting. So why this is so cool is like, okay, apparently on here there's a link to a PDF, and all they're saying is like, by the way, when you link to a PDF, that PDF may not have its accessibility settings like set properly. We don't know because we haven't looked into it, but make sure it is. So that's really nice service this Wave provides. Okay. You may not have that issue if you yourself don't have those problems, but it's something that you should really consider doing for your viewers.
People say "Rip, well played" in the chat at the CS50.
Yeah, cool. One last thing, okay. Zen Garden.
Zen Garden, yeah. I have seen this. This is a cool, really cool website.
Okay,
I like this a lot.
Okay, so let me set this up. I'm gonna be like, I'll be the straight man, okay? Or you be the straight man, I don't know. So like, okay, there's like so many different websites in this world, right? You've got like this sort of like, I don't know, sort of modern. Is this fuchsia? Is this periwinkle? I don't know what color it is. It's got these ball things with symbols and stuff. Some websites look like this. Nice design, looks great. You know, you've got other websites in the world that, you know, look like this. Ooh, it's kind of like this sliding over the background. Almost looks like CS50. It's the same font, Gotham, I believe. Wow, that's ironic. But yeah, it's a pretty cool looking website. Totally different topic, totally different website. Oh, let's check this out. Steel sounds tough, hard, awesome. So Steel, what's going on here? Oh,
this one, actually, this one was my favorite when I saw it.
You know, it's weird when I do through a projector, it doesn't render the animations. If you actually go on your computers right now to Zen Garden and go to like zengarden.com/219, you'll have like all these things like moving around like construction cranes. I don't know, when I connect to a projector, I lose that. I gotta figure out why that's happening.
That is weird, actually.
But, so here's what you do. Like, this will freak people out, and this is why CSS is so cool. If you go to view source for each of these pages, let me do this. Okay, so here's the view source for this page. We could dig in there. Oh, there's definitely a head tag, an HTML tag, blah, blah, blah. Cool stuff here. And then we go to this page's view source. We check that out, and we look at the previous one. Okay, well, maybe I just made a mistake. Let me check this one out. Okay, view source here. Let me check out the previous one. They're identical pages.
First of all, I'm impressed that you can keep track of which one they are because how small those tabs are.
Yeah, I just remember because I did it before and messed up. But yeah, like, so HTML is literally your content and the structure, the semantic structure of your content. CSS is just the dressing of making it look like this or like this or like this. Identical content, but looks totally different. And that's why I think the CSS stream or Twitch, or what do the young kids these days call these things?
It'll be a stream, yeah.
It's a stream,
Twitch is the website. Twitch is the website.
Okay, the stream is going to be really interesting. I wish I was in town for that.
Cue the skin and skeleton analogy.
Yeah, that one grosses me out.
We beat that one. We beat that one dead. But yeah, CSS is the skin. HTML is the skeleton.
Woo! All right. RAM is screaming from so much tabs. I got the new MacBook Pro, which is like even like I like saved up for it
too. I mean, mine's pretty thin as well. But.
Yeah. Oh, and you don't need the dongle. I'm in dongle hell, but you know, like here's your LAN cable and stuff. I got it because for work, and I'm totally gonna plug something. I'm going to do it, because like, you can cut me off, you're not going to cut me off. Okay, go to...
All right, and we're done. I'm just kidding.
cappy.adbx.online. This is a Google form. If you're interested in learning how to collect data in the field for surveys, this is a course I'm running for Asian Development Bank and Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Right now, how many people do we have for this course? We've got...
You said 700 something, right?
736, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm a little bit nervous because I'm running like, oh, I just showed an email there, sorry about that. I'm running like the back end using OpenEdX software for this, and I know things are just gonna like crash like on the first day. But definitely go here, sign up if you want to do that. And why am I talking about that?
It's super cool. That's a project that you're working on. Share.
Cool.
That's what we're all about.
So there you go. So this is cappy.adbx. adbx.online. And a little final plug for CS50. If it weren't for CS50, like I wouldn't be like doing like stuff like this. Like I'm making online courses and stuff like that. I would never had like the courage to actually think I could do something like that. But after making it through like really hard P sets, I was like, I think I've kind of tricked myself into thinking I can do it. And in the end, it like works out. Because the greatest lesson for CS50 was, well, two things. One, you can do it, and second, just Google.
Yeah.
Because you can find the stuff out there.
It just that should be just the only bullet point. Just Google.
Google it. A link.
I was there when you first did your first the hackathon. Your first hackathon with us.
Yeah.
I was there. That's when I met you.
That was a JavaScript app.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Been there. I've seen Tom since the beginning, the very beginning. Well, maybe not the very beginning of your coding career.
Sweet.
But certainly since the very beginning of your time with CS50.
Oh, yeah, adbx.online will give you an internal service error because we're not up yet. So don't go there. .online. Yeah, this is currently down. Because we're launching in about 2 weeks, and I didn't want to pay the bill for the server.
Sure.
So it's not live yet, but it will be live. Okay.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for that. That was awesome. Looking at data like that and looking at validation and accessibility, those are all very important things that I think a lot of people take for granted, certainly. But if you're in that space, then it sort of becomes kind of like something you're always thinking about, I have to imagine. And to be fair, I haven't done a lot of work in that field myself, but thanks to folks like you who do that, who try to spread that knowledge, I think more people become more conscious of it, certainly.
Yep.
Well, thanks, everybody. So we've been at 3 hours and 23 minutes, and that's just this stream. We had the last stream as well, which was cut slightly short. We had to get everything ready to cross-post, cross-stream. But thanks so much, everybody who tuned in. This was a big departure from what we normally do in terms of game programming and kind of going from the ground up with HTML. This was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to the CSS stream next week. We'll cover a lot of really cool stuff. And I mean, thereafter, sort of the sky's the limit. We'll go into JavaScript, we'll go into Bootstrap, we'll go into jQuery, we'll go into DOM manipulation, we'll go into React. We may or may not go into Angular and Vue. We'll go into Flask. I'm talking about Kareem. I do a Flask stream, so everybody get Kareem. Let's get Kareem in here. It'll be a good time. But yeah, thanks to everybody who tuned in. We had a lot of viewership today, consistently. Thanks to Beast Chris and Brenda, TJ Heinzo. Which is stream schedule? TJ Heinzo says. Not a consistent schedule yet. We're going to be more consistent when the undergrads all come back, but on Tuesday, I have to remember. I'm definitely doing a stream next week. I think Wednesday I'm doing Minesweeper, and then Thursday I think is CSS.
Cool.
And then Friday is Render 50. But it'll be on our Facebook. Go to facebook.com/CS50. We post all of our upcoming events, upcoming videos there. And so special thanks also to Tom for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Almost the entire duration of the stream, so that was great. I enjoy very much having a back and forth. It was a great time. And you can push to Twitter too. They are all on Twitter. We do notify all of our now we post an event or post a tweet, I should say. Oh, you're talking about the stream? I'm not. I have to look at that. I'm not sure. Wasn't aware that Twitter had a live stream functionality into it. このストリームありがとうまたね。
来てくれてありがとうございました。
Thanks for the stream. Thank you both. See you next time. Ajax. Oh, Ajax too. We will cover Ajax. Tom may not be here because Tom has to unfortunately fly back to Japan, which makes me sad because I would love to do more streams, but unfortunately.
I'll be in town. I'll be in town mostly in the spring.
Whenever you're around, are you going to be around the whole spring?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. You're not flying back to Japan?
I'm flying back to Japan, but officially I have to be in the U.S. to do the work, so I will be in the U.S. Wink, wink.
Oh, okay. Gotcha. So, yeah, we'll get Tom in here again, because Tom was awesome. Juban3, Diamene, Arzawu36, and TJ Heinzo, thank you so much for the follow. Appreciate it. I'll see all of you soon.
Good seeing you, seeing all the other people I know in the stream. Really fun to be here tonight. Pitch
more ideas for us to do, too, because the more of these sort of lower level from beginning videos we do, the more we can start to make case study style stuff, and that's the goal, is to start making actual websites and to take all of these abstract ideas and actually make a product. So we'll do that together. But until next time, we'll see all of you. Have a terrific weekend. Yeah, this was CS50 on Twitch.